The guard asked for ID. My wife handed over her company card. "He's with me," she said, "just a driver." I handed the guard a card with the presidential seal. The scanner flashed Yankee White, priority 1. The guard picked up the red phone. "Open the VIP lane, now." My wife stared at me in shock. The rain had started that morning as a whisper against our bedroom window, the kind of gentle percussion that usually lulled me into a few extra minutes of sleep. But today it felt different. Today each droplet seemed to carry weight, purpose, a drumbeat counting down to something I couldn't yet name. I remember lying there in the pre-dawn darkness, listening to Sarah's breathing beside me, steady and sure, the way it had been for 12 years. 12 years of marriage. 12 years of building what I thought was an unshakable foundation. 12 years of me being exactly who she thought I was. "Are you awake?" Her voice cut through the darkness, already carrying that edge of impatience she'd perfected over the past 3 years. The same 3 years she'd been climbing the corporate ladder at Morrison Fletcher Defense Solutions, one of the largest military contractors in the nation. The same 3 years our marriage had transformed from partnership into something that resembled a business arrangement where I held the losing position. "Yeah," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Neutral had become my default setting. Neutral didn't start arguments. Neutral didn't question. Neutral kept the peace, however hollow that peace had become. She sat up by him, the silhouette of her shoulders tense against the pale light bleeding through the curtains. "Don't forget, we have that site visit today, the new facility outside Fort Meade. I need you to drive me. Marcus is taking the day off and I'm not dealing with a rental." Marcus, her usual driver, her assistant, her right-hand man in ways that I'd stopped examining too closely because examining meant acknowledging, and acknowledging meant dealing with truths I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Not yet. Not until I had all the pieces arranged exactly right. "What time do we need to leave?" I asked, already knowing and I'd clear my schedule. I would always clear my schedule. That's what I'd become over these years. The accommodating husband, the supportive partner, the man who'd left his career to support hers at the second moment, to be present for a family we'd planned but never quite gotten around to starting. There were always reasons: her promotion, her project, her deadline, her career trajectory that couldn't afford the interruption of pregnancy, of maternity leave, of divided attention. 9 sharp, and Daniel? She turned to look at me, her face barely visible in the dim light. "Please try to look presentable. This is a high-security facility. Important people will be there. I can't have you showing up in your usual—" She waved her hand vaguely, a gesture that managed to dismiss my entire existence in a single fluid motion. "I'll wear a suit," I said, my voice still neutral, still calm, even as something cold and sharp settled in my chest. The same feeling I'd been carrying for months now, ever since I'd started really paying attention, really watching, really listening to the spaces between her words where the truth lived. She seemed satisfied with that, sliding out of bed and disappearing into the bathroom. I heard the shower start, listened to her morning routine through the walls, the sounds of a woman preparing for battle, for conquest, for another day of being Sarah Morrison Fletcher, Senior Vice President of Strategic Defense Initiatives. Not Sarah Whitmore, the woman I'd married. Not Sarah Whitmore who'd promised we were a team. She'd stopped being Sarah Whitmore 3 years ago when the hyphenated name appeared. When her salary tripled mine, then quintupled it, then grew into numbers that made my former government salary look like pocket change. I got up and moved through my own morning routine with mechanical precision. Shower, shave. The charcoal suit I'd bought for my father's funeral 2 years ago. White shirt, navy tie, gold cufflinks he'd given me, engraved with something Sarah had never bothered to read closely. Wisdom is knowing when to speak and when to let actions thunder. By the time I emerged from the bedroom, she was already in the kitchen, power suit sharp enough to cut glass, blonde hair swept up in that severe style she favored now. She barely glanced up from her phone as I poured coffee. "We're picking up Gerard from his hotel at 9:15, she said, scrolling with her thumb. "He's flying in from Brussels. Major player, defense attaché, connections across NATO. Do not embarrass me." "I won't," I said, adding the cream she liked to her coffee, the ritual so ingrained I didn't need to think about it. 2 sugars, splash of cream. exactly the way she'd been drinking it since college, back when we were different people leading different lives. She took the cup without thanks, without acknowledgement, the way she'd been taking everything from me for years. My time, my career, my dignity, all of it handed over so willingly, so stupidly, because I'd believed in us, in her, in the promises we'd made. The drive from our McLean townhouse toward Fort Meade took us through the gray morning, rain still falling in sheets that the wipers struggled to keep pace with. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, phone clamped to her ear, discussing specifications and contracts and numbers that represented weapon systems, defense capabilities, technologies designed to keep people safe or end them efficiently, depending on your perspective. I drove in silence, exactly as expected. The invisible chauffeur, the accessory husband, the man who'd once held one of the highest security clearances in the nation, who'd briefed presidents and generals and agency directors, now reduced to making sure his wife arrived on time and properly caffeinated. Gerard Hoffman was waiting under the hotel awning when we pulled up, rain drumming on the green canvas above his head. He was exactly what I'd expected. European expensive, with that particular brand of arrogance that comes from playing with international power. Silver hair, $10,000 suit, smile that never quite reached his calculating eyes. Sarah, he slid into the back seat with practiced ease, bringing the scent of expensive cologne and entitled power. Magnificent timing. The weather here is absolutely dreadful. Belgium in spring is much more civilized. She laughed, that professional laugh she'd perfected. Gerard, we'll make it worth your flight. The facility is something special. Exactly what we discussed in Geneva. I caught his eyes in the rearview mirror, watched him assess me with the quick, dismissive glance usually reserved for waitstaff. And this is? My husband, Sarah said, the word carrying no warmth, no pride, just a statement of fact. Daniel, he's driving today. Ah, Gerard said, and that single syllable carried everything. Understanding, dismissal, a flicker of something that might have been pity or contempt. I couldn't quite tell. Probably both. They launched into conversation, technical and dense, discussing contracts and specifications and the political landscape of defense procurement. I drove, listening with half an ear, the other half of my attention on the route I'd memorized, the route I'd driven 3 times already this month. Practicing, preparing, making sure every detail would land exactly right. The facility appeared through the rain like a fortress, all concrete and steel in purpose. High fences topped with razor wire, guard stations every 50 yards, cameras tracking every angle. The kind of place where secrets lived and died, where classifications meant something, where access was privilege and power incarnate. I pulled up to the main gate, watched the guard emerge from his station, clipboard in hand, suspicious by training and temperament. This was it, the moment I'd been building toward for 3 months. 3 months of careful planning, of moving pieces into position, of letting Sarah believe she held all the cards while I'd been quietly stacking the deck. Identification, the guard said, leaning down to Sarah's window. Young, maybe 25, taking his job seriously in the way that people do when they understand the weight of what they're protecting. Sarah rolled down her window, already pulling her company credentials. Sarah Morrison Fletcher, Senior Vice President, Morrison Fletcher Defense Solutions. I'm on the VIP list for the 10 o'clock demonstration. The guard took her credentials, scanned them, nodded. Yes, ma'am, and the others? Gerard Hoffman, Sarah gestured to the back seat. NATO Defense Attaché, also on your list. Gerard produced his diplomatic passport, his own credentials, multiple cards that proclaimed his importance across international borders. The guard processed them, professional and thorough. Then the guard's eyes shifted to me. And the driver, ma'am? I watched Sarah's face in profile, saw the slight tightening around her mouth, the momentary flash of something that might have been irritation or embarrassment. He's with me, she said, her tone carrying that particular dismissive quality she'd perfected. Just a driver. He can wait in the car or your parking area, whatever's protocol. Still need identification, ma'am, the guard persisted, and I could have kissed him for his adherence to regulations. Good man, doing his job exactly right. For God's sake, Sarah muttered, turning to me. Daniel, give him your driver's license or whatever. I reached into my jacket pocket, not for my wallet, but for the slim leather case I'd been carrying for 15 years. The one that had lived in my desk drawer for the past 3 years, unused but carefully maintained, waiting for exactly this moment. I pulled out the card, simple, elegant, nothing flashy, and handed it to the guard. The change in his expression was instantaneous. His eyes went wide, then snapped to my face, then back to the card, then up to meet my gaze with a respect that bordered on alarm. His hand actually trembled slightly as he walked back to his station. What did you give him? Sarah asked, her voice carrying a note of curiosity mixed with annoyance at the delay. My identification, I said, keeping my voice perfectly neutral, watching the guard station through the rain-streaked windshield. The guard wasn't just checking a database. He was on the phone, the red phone, the one that doesn't connect to normal lines. The one that goes directly to Central Security Operations. I watched him talking rapidly, gesturing toward our car, his posture gone from casual authority to rigid military bearing. This is taking too long, Gerard said from the back seat. Sarah, perhaps you should call ahead. Tell them to expedite. But Sarah was watching me now, really watching me, perhaps for the first time in years. I could feel the weight of her attention, the dawning realization that something wasn't quite as she'd assumed, that the carefully constructed hierarchy she'd built, with her at the apex and me somewhere near the foundation, might not be as solid as she'd believed. The guard station door opened. The guard emerged, no longer alone. With him was a senior officer. The uniform, the bearing, the way every other guard in sight suddenly stood a little straighter. He walked toward our car with purpose, his face professionally neutral, but his eyes locked on me with unmistakable recognition. Ma'am, the original guard said to Sarah, handing back her credentials and Gerard's with barely a glance. You're cleared through to Lot A. Someone will meet you at the main entrance. Then he turned to me and his entire bearing shifted. Not quite a salute. I wasn't in uniform, wasn't on active duty, but close, respectful, deferential in a way that Sarah had probably never seen anyone treat me. Sir, he said, and that single word carried weight. We've opened VIP Lane 1 for you. Major Hendricks will escort your vehicle directly to the command entrance. We weren't notified of your visit. Last minute, I said easily, taking back my card. Not my driver's license, not some civilian identification. My card. The one with the seal. The one that still worked, still opened doors, still commanded respect in certain circles. The ones that mattered. Sarah's hand shot out faster than I'd seen her move in years, grabbing my wrist before I could return the card to my pocket. She snatched it from my fingers, held it up to catch the gray light filtering through the rain. I watched her face as she read it, watched the color drain, watched her lips part slightly in shock, watched her eyes dart from the card to my face and back again, as if the man sitting next to her had suddenly transformed into a stranger. The card was simple, presidential seal embossed in gold, my name, my designation, and in small, precise lettering that probably meant nothing to most people, but everything to those who understood. Yankee White, Priority 1, active status. What? Sarah's voice came out strangled, unfamiliar. What is this? Gerard leaned forward from the back seat, trying to see what had caused such a reaction. The guard remained at the window, standing at attention, waiting. Sir, the guard said, Major Hendricks is ready to escort you through. I looked at Sarah, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in months with the full weight of who I actually was. Not the diminished version she'd created, not the convenient husband she'd reduced me to, but me, Daniel Whitmore, the man who'd briefed presidents in the Situation Room, the man who'd held clearances that made her corporate access look like a library card, the man who'd given it all up temporarily for love and partnership and promises that turned out to be conditional. I think, I said quietly, my voice still calm but no longer neutral, we should probably proceed with your meeting. We can talk about this later. But the way I said later carried its own weight, its own promise, its own reckoning that had been building for 3 years and was now, finally, unavoidably, about to break through the surface of our carefully maintained fiction. The gates ahead began to swing open. VIP Lane 1, not the standard entrance, not the route that corporate executives took, the route reserved for a very different kind of visitor. Sarah was still staring at the card in her hand, at the seal, at the clearance level, at the active status that meant I wasn't just some former government employee. I was still connected, still cleared, still very much inside the circles she'd been trying so desperately to break into. Drive, she whispered. And for the first time in 3 years, it wasn't a command. It was a plea. I put the car in gear and followed Major Hendricks toward truths that had been waiting patiently, like I have my med, for exactly the right moment to emerge. The rain intensified as we followed Major Hendricks's escort vehicle through security checkpoints that Sarah's credentials alone would have never breached. I could feel the tension radiating from her body, a physical thing, electric and unstable, crackling in the confined space of the car like a live wire searching for ground. Her fingers still clutched my identification card, knuckles white, as if holding it tightly enough might somehow change what it said, might rewrite the reality that had just detonated in her carefully constructed world. Gerard had gone silent in the back seat. No more casual conversation. No more European charm, just the heavy quiet of a man recalculating every interaction, every assumption, every casual dismissal. I could see him in the rearview mirror, his expression no longer dismissive but cautious, watchful. The look of someone who just realized he'd badly misread a room and was now trying to determine the consequences. We passed through 2 more security stations, each guard snapping to increased alertness as they processed my credentials through their systems. At the second checkpoint, a full colonel emerged from the command post, his uniform crisp despite the weather, ribbons and insignia marking him as someone who'd seen combat, who'd earned his position through more than just time in politics. "Mr. Whitmore," he said as I rolled down my window, rain immediately beginning to soak the arm of my suit. His hand came up in what wasn't quite a salute but held the same respect. "Colonel Patterson, facility commander. We weren't informed you'd be conducting an inspection today." "Not an inspection, Colonel," I replied, my voice carrying the calm authority I had almost forgotten I possessed. "Just escorting my wife to her scheduled demonstration. Morrison Fletcher Defense Solutions." Patterson's eyes flicked to Sarah, then back to me, and I watched him process the connection, the implications. He was career military, smart enough to read between lines, to understand that something significant was occurring, even if he couldn't quite see the full picture yet. "Of course, sir, we've prepared the executive observation deck for the demonstration. But given your clearance level, would you prefer access to the operations center? We can brief you on the full specifications, the classified elements that won't be part of the standard presentation." Sarah made a small sound, something between a gasp and a protest. I didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge it. Instead, I kept my eyes on Patterson, watching him wait for my answer with genuine deference. "The observation deck will be fine, Colonel," I said. "Today I'm just a supportive husband." The irony in my voice was subtle, pitched so only Sarah would catch it. I felt her flinch beside me. Patterson nodded, professional enough not to show confusion at my choice. "Very good, sir. Major Hendricks will take you directly to the executive entrance. If you need anything during your visit, anything at all, my office is available." "Appreciated, Colonel." We continued forward, following Hendricks past enormous hangars and bunker-like structures, past guard towers and sensor arrays, deeper into a facility that represented billions in defense spending, in cutting-edge technology, in the kind of power that Sarah had been chasing for 3 years, the kind of power she'd thought was the ultimate achievement, the pinnacle, the thing that mattered most. "Daniel," her voice was small, unfamiliar, not the commanding tone I'd grown accustomed to, not the dismissive edge that had colored our every interaction, just my name, spoken like a question, like a plea, like the beginning of something she didn't know how to finish. "Not now," I said quietly. "You have a presentation to deliver, important people to impress. Isn't that what you said this morning?" "You can't just," she started, heat creeping back into her voice. The familiar anger that flared whenever she felt her control slipping. Can't what? I turned to look at her fully for the first time since the guard station, and whatever she saw in my face made her stop mid-sentence. Can't let you focus on your work? Can't support your career? Can't be the accommodating husband you've spent 3 years training me to be? That's not fair, she whispered. No, I agreed, it isn't. Hendrix's vehicle pulled to a stop in front of a steel-reinforced entrance that looked more like a bank vault than a door. This wasn't the standard visitor entrance. This was the kind of access point where people with serious clearances entered, where classified briefings occurred, where the real decisions about weapons and wars and national security were made. I don't understand, Gerard finally spoke from the back seat, his accent thicker with confusion or stress. Sarah, you said your husband was... I thought you said he was just... I know what she said, I interrupted. My voice still calm, still controlled, but carrying an edge now, a sharpness that I'd kept sheathed for far too long. She said I was just a driver, just her husband, just someone who gave up his career to support hers, just someone who didn't matter much at all. Daniel, Sarah's voice broke on my name. All true statements, I continued, opening my door, letting the rain hit me, welcoming the cold shock of it. I am your driver today. I am your husband. I did give up my career, my position, my clearances, temporarily to support you. But just? That word doesn't mean what you think it means, Sarah. It never did. I stepped out into the rain, walked around to open her door with the same courtesy I'd always shown her, the same respect I'd maintained even as she'd systematically stripped away my dignity. Old habits, old training, old values that apparently meant something different to me than they did to her. She emerged slowly, carefully, as if the ground beneath her feet had suddenly become uncertain. Gerard followed, his expensive suit already darkening with rain, his practiced charm completely absent. 3 people standing in the rain outside a high-security facility, but the real storm was internal, building about to break in ways that concrete and steel couldn't contain. The door opened before we reached it. A woman in civilian clothes but with military bearings stood waiting, tablet in hand. Professional smile perfectly calibrated. Ms. Morrison Fletcher, Mr. Hoffman, welcome to Site 7. I'm Elizabeth Chen, Director of External Relations. We're honored to host your demonstration today. Her eyes shifted to me and I watched the recognition dawn, watched her posture shift subtly. Mr. Whitmore, this is unexpected. I'll notify Director Carmichael immediately. No need, I said. I'm just here in a support capacity today. Mrs. Morrison Fletcher's demonstration should proceed as scheduled. Chen looked uncertain, glancing between Sarah and me, as if trying to decode what was really happening. Of course, but, sir, given your status, if you'd like to join Director Carmichael in the observation room rather than the standard viewing area is fine, I said firmly. This is my wife's presentation, her moment. I wouldn't want to overshadow it. The words hung in the air, heavy with meanings that Elizabeth Chen couldn't fully grasp, but that Sarah understood perfectly. I was giving her exactly what she'd always claimed to want: space for her career, freedom to shine without my presence complicating things. But now, after what had just been revealed, that gift carried a different weight. It wasn't support, it was distance. It was separation. It was the beginning of a reckoning. We moved through security protocols, through scanners and checkpoints, through the ritualized dance of clearance verification. Sarah and Gerard went through the standard procedures: temporary badges, limited access, the careful shepherding of civilian contractors into military spaces. I went through something different: recognition, respect, doors opening before I reached them, personnel stepping aside with nods that acknowledged something Sarah was only beginning to understand. The observation deck was exactly what I'd expected: comfortable seating for executives and VIPs, large windows overlooking a test range, monitoring equipment that would display telemetry and data, but nothing truly classified. The sanitized version of reality, carefully prepared for corporate eyes and foreign attachés and congressional oversight committees. The show. Sarah was ushered to the front, provided with a presentation remote and a podium. given 5 minutes to compose herself before other attendees would arrive. Gerard took a seat in the second row, still quiet, still recalculating. I moved to the back of the room near the door, positioning myself where I could observe everything. Daniel. She said my name again, turning to face me across the empty room, her voice carrying that unfamiliar quality, uncertainty mixed with something that might have been fear. We need to talk about this, about what just happened, about that card, that clearance, about everything. After your presentation, I said, this is your moment, remember? Your project, your client, your career advancement. I'm just the driver who brought you here. Stop saying that, she snapped, heat flaring again, comfortable anger rising to cover deeper emotions. Stop being so fucking calm about this. Would you prefer I make a scene? I asked mildly. 'Cause problems during your important demonstration? Embarrass you in front of Gerard and whoever else is about to walk through that door? She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I need to understand. That clearance, that card, the way everyone's treating you, it's active. It says active status. You told me you left your government position. You said you were done with that life. I said I was stepping back to support your career, I interrupted. I said I wanted to be present, to be available, to make our marriage work. I said a lot of things, Sarah, all true, but you heard what you wanted to hear. You assumed what was convenient to assume. The door opened and voices filtered in, other executives from Morrison Fletcher, military officers, Elizabeth Chen shepherding the crowd with practiced efficiency. Sarah's moment had arrived, her opportunity to shine, to impress, to secure whatever contract or advancement this demonstration represented. I watched her make the choice in real time, watched her push down the questions, the confusion, the dawning realization that her husband was not at all who she'd convinced herself he was. Watched her slide back into her professional persona, the armor of competence and confidence she wore so well in boardrooms and briefings. The demonstration began, and I had to admit, she was good at this. Brilliant even. She commanded the room, explained complex defense systems in language that translated technical specifications into strategic advantages, answered questions with confidence and precision. This was the Sarah I'd fallen in love with. Smart, capable, passionate about her work. But it was also the Sarah who'd forgotten that partnership meant something, that marriage was supposed to be built on honesty and mutual respect, not convenient assumptions and careful omissions. Through the windows, weapon systems deployed on the test range below. Missiles launching, targets acquired, demonstrations of precision and power. Gerard leaned forward, clearly impressed. The military officers nodded approval. Sarah's presentation was landing exactly as she'd intended. And I stood in the back, watching it all, holding truths she didn't even know to ask about yet. During a pause in the demonstration, while technicians reset for the next phase, Elizabeth Chen approached me quietly. Mr. Whitmore, I apologize for the informal reception. If we'd known you were visiting, Director Carmichael would have arranged proper protocols. He's asked if you'd join him for lunch after the demonstration. There are some matters he'd like to discuss. What kind of matters? I asked, though I already knew. Word would have spread by now. Daniel Whitmore on site, Yankee white clearance, active status, questions would be asked, assumptions would be made. Was this an inspection, an evaluation, a security review? I believe he'd prefer to discuss that privately, Chen said diplomatically. But I can tell you that several current initiatives would benefit from your input if you're willing to provide it. I glanced at Sarah, saw her watching me from the corner of her eye while maintaining her conversation with Gerard. She'd heard the exchange, understood that I was being courted, recruited, pulled back into circles she'd assumed I'd left permanently. Tell Director Carmichael I appreciate the invitation, I said. But today I'm here purely in a personal capacity. My wife's presentation is my priority. Chen nodded, but I could see the wheels turning. She'd relay the message, but the subtext would be clear. Daniel Whitmore was available, engaged, still very much in the game. The question was, what game and on whose terms? The demonstration concluded with appropriate applause and congratulations. Sarah fielded questions with grace, collected business cards, made promises to follow up. Gerard was effusive in his praise, already discussing next steps, potential contracts, the kinds of numbers that represented career-defining achievements. But through it all, I watched her watching me, measuring the distance between who she thought I was and who I actually am. That distance was growing, expanding with each passing moment, each new interaction that revealed how thoroughly she'd underestimated the man she'd married. The crowd began to disperse, heading toward a catered lunch in the executive dining facility. Sarah made her excuses, extracted herself from Gerard and the others with promises to join them shortly, then walked across the observation deck toward me with deliberate steps. "We're talking about this," she said. "Right now. No more deflections. No more after your presentation. No more calm, mysterious bullshit. You owe me an explanation." "I owe you," I repeated softly, dangerously. "That's an interesting perspective, Sarah. Don't do that. Don't turn this around. You let me believe, you let everyone believe, that you were just some former government employee who gave it all up. You let me think I was the one with the important career, the valuable connections. And all this time you had this?" She gestured vaguely, encompassing the facility, the treatment I'd received, the clearances that opened doors she'd been desperately trying to access. "I let you believe what you chose to believe," I said. "I told you the truth about my position, my clearances, my work. You just stopped listening, stopped asking questions, stopped seeing me as anything other than convenient support staff for your ambitions." "That's not," she started, then faltered, because it was. It absolutely was, and somewhere beneath her anger and confusion she knew it. "You wanted me available," I continued, my voice still calm but carrying the weight of 3 years' worth of careful observation, of deliberate diminishment, of promises broken and respect eroded. "You wanted me accessible, at home, ready to accommodate your schedule and your needs. And I did that, willingly, because I loved you, because I believed in us. But somewhere along the way, your availability became my irrelevance. Your success became my failure. And that card you're still holding, that's just the beginning of truths you stopped wanting to know." She looked down at the card in her hand, at the seal and the clearance level, and the active status that meant I hadn't actually left my old life. I just stepped sideways, maintaining connections and clearances for reasons she'd never thought to ask about. "What else?" she whispered. "Everything," I said simply. "But first, you have a lunch to attend, contracts to discuss, Gerard to impress. Your career waits for no one, remember? Isn't that what you told me when we canceled our anniversary dinner for your Singapore meeting? When we postponed starting a family for your promotion? When we moved into the townhouse you picked without asking my opinion, because my opinion on where we live didn't really matter compared to your commute time?" Each question landed like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading, disturbing the surface of carefully maintained illusions. "I thought you understood," she said. But even she could hear how weak it sounded. "I did understand," I replied. "That was the problem. I understood everything. I just chose to believe that eventually, when you had what you wanted, when you'd climbed as high as you needed to climb, you'd remember we were supposed to be partners. That you'd see me again, really see me." "And if I'm seeing you now," she asked. "Then maybe," I said, "we can finally start having honest conversations. But first, lunch, your career, your moment. Go shine, Sarah. That's what you do best." I moved past her toward the door, leaving her standing in the observation deck with my identification card still clutched in her hand, with questions multiplying faster than she could formulate them, with the uncomfortable realization that the man she'd married had never actually left. He'd just been waiting, watching, preparing for exactly this moment. When the truth becomes louder than the lies we tell ourselves, there's no going back. Only forward into whatever comes next. The executive dining facility was designed to impress. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Maryland countryside, reclaimed wood tables that probably cost more than most people's cars, abstract art that whispered military budget without screaming it. I stood near one of those windows, watching the rain trace patterns, the grass rented, while behind me the carefully orchestrated dance of defense contracting played out over seared salmon and artisanal greens. Sarah was in her element, positioned at the head table between Gerard and a two-star general whose name I'd recognized immediately. General Marcus Rivera, Deputy Commander of Defense Innovation. A man I'd briefed personally on 4 separate occasions, twice in the White House, once at Peterson Space Force Base, and once during a crisis situation in a bunker beneath the Pentagon that officially never happened. Rivera kept glancing at me. Not obviously, he was too professionally trained for that. But I caught the looks, saw the wheels turning behind his careful military bearing. He remembered me, remembered the briefings, the clearances, the access, and now here I was, standing alone by the window while my wife networked her way through what she thought was the opportunity of a lifetime. "The salmon is excellent," a voice said beside me. I turned to find Elizabeth Chen, still playing hostess, but with that sharp intelligence in her eyes that marked her as more than just public relations. "Though I suspect you are not particularly hungry." "Perceptive," Fawn said, "part of the job description." She looked out at the rain with me, giving the appearance of casual conversation while actually conducting reconnaissance. I recognized the technique because I'd taught it, in another life, to another generation of intelligence professionals. "Director Carmichael would still like a word, if you're available. He's quite insistent, actually. And quite curious, I imagine." "Intensely." She smiled slightly. "Word travels fast in our community, Mr. Whitmore. Daniel Whitmore, active Yankee white clearance, married to a defense contractor's rising star, showing up unannounced at a facility demonstration. It raises questions." "I'm sure it does." "Are you here to answer those questions?" I turned to face her fully, measuring my words. "I'm here because my wife asked me to drive her. Everything else is just context that people are choosing to read into the situation." "Context," Chen repeated thoughtfully. "That's a diplomatic way to phrase it. General Rivera doesn't think it's just context. He thinks it's deliberate positioning. He's wondering if this represents some kind of audit, some oversight initiative that wasn't communicated through proper channels. General Rivera is welcome to ask me directly. He's trying to determine if asking directly would be appropriate, given that you're currently playing the role of supportive spouse rather than whatever your actual function is." I had to appreciate her directness. My actual function today is exactly what I claimed. Supportive spouse. What my function might be tomorrow or next week or in 6 months, that's a different conversation. She studied me for a long moment. "You're not what she says you are." "No one ever is," I replied. "We're all just collections of stories people tell themselves, versions they find comfortable or convenient. I'm just finally deciding which version I want to tell." "That sounds ominous." "Does it?" I let my gaze drift back to the window, to the rain that had become a constant drumbeat. "I think it sounds honest, maybe for the first time in a long time." Across the room, Sarah laughed at something Gerard said, that professional laugh that had replaced her real one somewhere along the way. I wondered if she even knew the difference anymore, if she could hear the hollow ring in it, the performance of pleasure rather than the genuine article. "Your wife is very talented," Chen observed, following my gaze. "Her presentation was technically excellent. Good balance of detail and accessibility. Strong command of the strategic implications. Morris and Fletcher is lucky to have her." "They are," I agreed, because it was true. Sarah had always been brilliant. It was part of what attracted me to her initially, that quick mind, that analytical precision, that ability to synthesize complex information into coherent strategy. I'd just forgotten that brilliance without empathy becomes something else, something sharper and colder and ultimately more lonely. "But you don't seem particularly impressed." "I've seen her present before, many times. I know what she's capable of. And yet something's different today. Something's changed." I looked at Chen directly, reading the genuine curiosity there, the professional interest mixed with something more personal. She was invested in this facility, in these programs, in the web of relationships that made defense contracting function. And now I'd appeared like a wild card in a carefully arranged deck, disrupting the established order simply by being more than expected. What's changed, I said carefully, is visibility. Sometimes things exist in shadow not because they're hidden, but because no one thinks to turn on the lights. Today, someone turned on the lights. You. The situation, I just showed my identification card at a security checkpoint. Everything else is people reacting to information that was always there, always true, just not previously acknowledged. That's remarkably philosophical for someone who used to brief presidents. I smiled despite myself. You've done your homework. Of course I have. The moment you cleared that first checkpoint, every relevant database in the intelligence community lit up with queries. Your name has been pinging through secure channels for the past 2 hours. People are very interested in why you're here, what you're doing, whether this represents some kind of policy shift or security reviewers, or God knows what else. And what do the databases tell you? That you're a ghost, Chen said bluntly. Active clearances at the highest level. Current access to programs that most people in this room don't even know exist. But no official position listed, no agency affiliation shown, just clearances and access and a note that all inquiries should be directed through a specific protocol that approximately 4 people in the entire government have authorization to use. Sounds mysterious. It sounds like someone who's still very much in the game, but playing by rules the rest of us don't see. Before I could respond, General Rivera detached himself from the main table and walked toward us with that purposeful military stride that suggested a man on a mission. Elizabeth Chen straightened slightly, her professional mask sliding back into place. "Mr. Whitmore," Rivera said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, confident, the handshake of someone used to commanding respect. "It's been, 18 months since our last briefing?" 22 months, I corrected. "Peterson, the hypersonic guidance system vulnerability assessment." His eyebrows rose slightly. "You remember the specific briefing?" "I remember all of them, General. It's my job to remember." "Is it still your job?" Rivera asked, the question carrying weight beyond the casual phrasing. "Because officially you left government service 3 years ago, retired. Step back to focus on personal matters. That's what the official record shows." "The official record is accurate, but incomplete," Rivera pressed. "Those clearances don't maintain themselves, Mr. Whitmore. Active Yankee White status requires ongoing justification, regular renewal, continuous vetting. You don't just keep that level of access as a souvenir from your former career." I could feel Sarah's attention from across the room, could sense her tuning into this conversation even while maintaining her discussion with Gerard and the Morrison Fletcher executives. This was the question she wanted answered too. What had I been doing for 3 years while she climbed her corporate ladder? "General Rivera," I said carefully, "I appreciate your interest, but perhaps this isn't the appropriate venue for this discussion. Today I'm here as a civilian, as my wife's guest. Any questions about my current status or activities should go through proper channels." "Which channels would those be, exactly?" I held his gaze steadily. "The same channels that flagged your inquiry about me approximately 90 seconds after you ran my name through your secure terminal during the presentation." Rivera's expression flickered, surprise, respect, perhaps a touch of unease. "You're monitoring security queries about yourself?" "I'm monitoring everything, General. That's what I do. What I've always done. The fact that I'm not sitting in an office in Langley or Fort Meade or the West Wing doesn't change the fundamental nature of my work." "Which is what exactly?" "Pattern recognition, threat assessment, strategic analysis, the same work I've been doing for 15 years, just from a different vantage point." Rivera absorbed this, recalibrating his understanding of the situation. "You're telling me you've been operating independently, outside official agency structure?" "I'm not telling you anything, General. I'm suggesting that assumptions about retirement and stepping back might not capture the full picture. I'm also suggesting that this conversation is making my wife's colleagues nervous and potentially compromising her business objectives for the day." I gestured subtly toward the main table where Sarah was indeed watching us now, her professional smile frozen in place, her eyes carrying that mixture of confusion and concern that had become her default expression since the guard station revelation. Rivera followed my gaze, understanding dawning. "This is about her, about your wife." Everything's about something, General. The question is whether you want to be part of this particular something or whether you'd prefer to let it unfold naturally. That sounds like a threat. Does it? I kept my voice mild, conversational. I thought it sounded like a suggestion that perhaps we let Mrs. Morrison Fletcher finish her business lunch without additional complications. She's worked hard for this opportunity. It would be a shame to see it compromised by tangential concerns. Rivera studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're protecting her. Even after he trailed off, but the implication was clear. Even after whatever had happened between us, even after the obvious tension, even after she'd spent 3 years treating me like irrelevant support staff. I'm maintaining boundaries, I corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Chen interjected quietly. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're still playing the supportive husband role, even while demonstrating that you're anything but the person she's been describing. Maybe I'm both, I said. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe I've been both for so long that neither of us remember which version is real anymore. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another officer, a colonel I didn't recognize, though his bearing suggested special operations background. He approached Rivera with the kind of urgency that meant something significant had developed. General, I apologize for the interruption, but we have a situation developing that requires your immediate attention. It's related to the Project Sentinel parameters we discussed this morning. Rivera's expression tightened. Can it wait? Sir, respectfully, no. The parameters have shifted. We need your authorization to proceed with the contingency protocols. I watched Rivera's face, read the concern there, the calculation of priorities. Project Sentinel, I knew that name, knew what it meant, knew the classified parameters that made it both necessary and dangerous. And apparently something had shifted, something significant enough to pull a 2-star general away from a business lunch with important contractors. Go, I said quietly. Whatever it is, it's more important than this conversation. Rivera looked at me sharply. You know about Sentinel? I know about everything that matters, General. That's my job, remember? He hesitated, clearly torn between security protocols and the growing crisis that needed his attention. Finally, he nodded. This conversation isn't over, Mr. Whitmore. I didn't think it was. Rivera left with the colonel, their conversation already shifting into clipped military terminology as they headed for the secure communications center. Elizabeth Chen watched them go, then turned back to me with renewed interest. You really do know everything, don't you? Not everything, just enough to be useful and dangerous, sometimes in equal measure. And your wife? Does she know how much you know? I looked across the room at Sarah, watched her laughing with Gerard again, watched her perform the role of successful executive with the kind of practiced ease that comes from forgetting it's a performance. My wife knows what she's chosen to know, what she's allowed herself to see, everything else. I shrugged. Everything else has been there all along, waiting for her to ask the right questions. But she never asked. No, she never asked. She assumed. She simplified. She created a version of me that fit comfortably into her narrative of success and trajectory and career advancement. And I let her. That's my mistake. My complicity in this whole arrangement. I let her believe a comfortable lie because the complicated truth required conversations neither of us wanted to have. Until today. Until today, I agreed. Today, the truth decided it was tired of waiting. Sarah was standing now, making her way toward us with that determined walk that meant she'd reached her limit of patience. Gerard trailed behind her, still looking uncertain, still trying to understand the shifting dynamics he'd stumbled into. Daniel, Sarah said, her voice carefully controlled, but with an edge underneath. Could I speak with you? Privately? Of course. I nodded to Elizabeth Chen. Thank you for the conversation, Miss Chen. Very illuminating. Likewise, Mr. Whitmore. I suspect we'll be speaking again soon. I followed Sarah out of the dining facility, through corridors lined with abstract representations of military might and technological advancement, into a small conference room that someone had helpfully left unlocked and unoccupied. Gerard hovered at the door, uncertain in whether to follow or provide privacy. Stay, Sarah told him. You should hear this too. whatever this is. She closed the door behind us, leaned against it as if needing the physical support. Her carefully constructed composure was cracking, showing the stress and confusion underneath. Okay, she said, no more deflections, no more mysterious hints, no more calm philosophical bullshit. I want the truth, all of it, right now. I took a seat at the conference table, gestured for them to do the same. What specifically do you want to know? Everything. I want to know why everyone here treats you like you're royalty. I want to know what that clearance means. I want to know what you've been doing for the past 3 years while I thought you were just what? Just at home? Just available? Just irrelevant? She flinched. That's not fair. Isn't it? What exactly did you think I was doing while you built your empire? What did you imagine filled my days? I don't know. I thought you were adjusting, decompressing, enjoying not having the pressure of your old work. You said you wanted to step back, to focus on us. I did say that, and I meant it, but stepping back doesn't mean stepping away. Refocusing doesn't mean becoming invisible. Then what does it mean? Her voice rose, frustration bleeding through. Because clearly you have been doing something important enough that generals snap to attention and facility commanders offer you private briefings and the entire security apparatus treats you like you're still some kind of major player. I looked at her for a long moment, measuring what to say, how much truth she was ready for. Gerard stood near the window, wisely silent, probably wishing he'd stayed in Belgium. I'm a consultant, I said finally, independent, specialized. I analyze threats, assess patterns, provide strategic guidance on matters that require discretion and specific expertise. For who? For people who need that particular skill set. That's not an answer, Daniel. That's evasion. It's the only answer I can give you without violating security protocols that are considerably more serious than your corporate NDAs. She stared at me, comprehension slowly dawning. You're still in it? You never left. You just went underground, became whatever the intelligence community version of a freelancer is. Something like that. And you didn't tell me. You didn't ask, I said quietly. You didn't want to know. Knowing would have complicated things, would have meant acknowledging that maybe I hadn't just rolled over and become your convenient accessory, would have required seeing me as something other than the supporting actor in your success story. The words hung between us, sharp and true and painful. And outside, the rain continued falling, washing away nothing, revealing everything. Sarah's face had gone pale, that particular shade of white that comes when fundamental assumptions about reality suddenly prove unstable. She gripped the back of a conference chair, knuckles bloodless, as if the furniture might anchor her against the shifting ground beneath her feet. Gerard had moved to the window, diplomatically pretending intense interest in the rain-soaked testing grounds below, while the American marriage beside him detonated in slow motion. 3 years, Sarah said finally, her voice hollow. 3 years I thought you were just existing, waiting for me to come home, being available for whatever I needed. And all that time you were, what, running operations, briefing presidents, playing spy games while I thought you were grocery shopping? I was grocery shopping, I said calmly. I also made sure we had fresh flowers every week, handled the dry cleaning, scheduled the lawn service. All the things you asked me to do, all the support you needed, I just happened to also be doing other things in between. Other things, she repeated, her voice climbing toward hysteria. Other things like maintaining the highest security clearance in the government? Other things like consulting with generals and defense officials? Other things that apparently make facility commanders nervous and database systems light up across the intelligence community? Yes. The simplicity of my answer seemed to break something in her. She pulled out a chair and sat down hard, as if her legs had stopped supporting her weight. Why didn't you tell me? I tried, multiple times actually, but you weren't interested in conversations that didn't directly relate to your career trajectory. Remember when I mentioned I was meeting with some former colleagues about consulting opportunities? You said that's nice without looking up from your laptop. Remember when I asked if you wanted to hear about my day? You said you were too tired, too stressed, too busy preparing for your next presentation. That's not the same as telling me you were still working in intelligence, isn't it? I told you I was consulting. I told you I was maintaining professional relationships. I told you I had meetings, projects, work that mattered. You just assumed that work couldn't possibly be as important as yours, that my meetings were probably coffee dates with other washed-up government employees, that my projects were hobbies to fill time. Gerard cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps I should wait outside. This seems rather personal. Stay, I said, not looking away from Sarah. You should understand the full context of who you're dealing with. Both of us. This affects Morrison Fletcher's relationship with both parties at this table. Sarah's eyes widened slightly at that, the implications clicking into place. Are you threatening my company? My contract? I'm stating facts. Gerard is trying to determine if Morrison Fletcher represents a reliable partner for significant defense procurement. Part of that assessment involves understanding the full picture of who's involved, what connections exist, what complications might arise. Right now, he's learning that his host's husband isn't what was advertised. That affects his calculation. I turned to face Gerard directly. Isn't that right, Mr. Hoffman? Gerard had the grace to look uncomfortable. This is highly irregular, Mr. Whitmore. Sarah presented you as someone peripheral to her professional life, someone without significant standing in the defense community. But clearly that presentation was incomplete, I supplied. The word you're looking for is incomplete, not dishonest exactly. Just based on assumptions that weren't quite accurate. Assumptions you allowed, Sarah said, heat creeping back into her voice now that the initial shock was wearing off. You let me think you were nobody. You let everyone think that. You played the diminished husband, the house spouse, the man who gave everything up. And now you're acting like I'm the villain for believing exactly what you showed me. I showed you what you wanted to see, I said quietly. I played the role you needed me to play. The question is why you needed that role so badly. Why was it important for you to be the only one with power, with status, with importance? Why did our marriage need that hierarchy to function? She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No answer came. Or maybe the answer was there, sitting between us like a third presence, too painful to acknowledge directly. The door opened without warning, a security violation that immediately put me on alert. A young officer entered, apologetic but urgent. Mrs. Morrison Fletcher, we need you back in the main facility. There's been a development with the demonstration. General Rivera requests your immediate presence. Sarah stood, grateful, I think, for the interruption, for the excuse to table this conversation. What kind of development? I'm not authorized to discuss it here, ma'am, but the general was very clear that you needed to be briefed immediately. She looked at me, something complicated in her expression. Anger, confusion, hurt, and underneath it all, a question she didn't know how to ask. Then she followed the officer out, Gerard trailing behind after a moment's hesitation, leaving me alone in the conference room with the rain and the silence and the weight of 3 years' worth of careful pretense finally cracking open. I pulled out my phone, not the commercial device most people carried, but a secure unit that looked identical to a standard smartphone, but functioned on entirely different architecture. 3 messages, waited, all marked urgent, all from contacts Sarah had never known existed. The first was from Director Carmichael. Rivera briefed me. Project Sentinel complication directly relates to Morrison Fletcher contract specifications. Potential security compromise. Need your assessment. The second was from a number with no name attached, but I recognize the routing. Database queries about your presence suggest coordinated interest from multiple parties. Recommend elevated awareness posture. The third made my blood run cold. Morrison Fletcher has been on our watch list for 6 months. Foreign intelligence indicators. Today's demonstration may be compromise operation. Your wife's involvement unclear. Proceed with extreme caution. I read that last message 3 times, each reading confirming what I'd been afraid of, what I'd been seeing signs of, but hoping I'd misread. Sarah's rapid advancement, her sudden access to high-level projects. Gerard Hoffman's too convenient interest. The demonstration today, scheduled at a facility that just happened to be testing systems directly related to programs I'd been monitoring for security vulnerabilities. Either Sarah was spectacularly unlucky in her professional associations, or she was being used. Or, and this was the possibility that made my chest tight, she was complicit. Knowingly or unknowingly participating in something that went beyond corporate espionage into actual national security threat. I needed to know which, needed to understand how deep this went, how much danger she was in, how much danger she represented. Because despite everything, despite the diminishment and the casual dismissals in the 3 years of being treated like irrelevant furniture, I still loved her, still wanted to protect her, still hoped that somewhere under the corporate armor and the professional ambition was the woman I'd married, the one who'd once believed in partnership and trust, in building something together. But hope wasn't intelligence. Faith wasn't analysis. Love didn't override security protocols or excuse potential breaches or make threats disappear through force of wanting. I made 3 calls in rapid succession, each brief, each conveying information that would set certain mechanisms in motion. Quiet investigations, discreet surveillance, the kind of attention that was invisible until it needed to be otherwise. If Sarah was being used, I'd find out. If she was complicit, I'd find out that too. And either way, I'd make sure that whatever was happening today stopped before it compromised systems that protected actual human lives. The conference room door opened again. Elizabeth Chen, her professional composure slightly cracked. "Mr. Whitmore, we have a situation." "Project Sentinel?" I asked, already standing. Her eyes widened fractionally. "You know about the Sentinel issue?" "I know about most issues before they become issues. That's my particular talent." "What's the current status?" "General Rivera has locked down the facility. No one in or out until we understand what went wrong with the demonstration. The Morrison-Fletcher system didn't just fail. It failed in a way that suggests either catastrophic design flaw or deliberate sabotage." "And my wife?" "Is in a secured briefing room with Rivera, the facility's security chief, and representatives from Morrison-Fletcher Corporate. They're trying to determine if this is a technical failure or something more serious." "It's more serious," I said, already moving toward the door. "The question is whether Mrs. Morrison-Fletcher knows how serious, or if she's been played as badly as it appears." Chen fell into step beside me as we navigated the corridors toward the facility's secure center. "You think she's innocent? That this isn't corporate espionage or intelligence gathering under cover of legitimate contracting?" "I think innocence is relative," I said carefully. "I think she's ambitious and driven, and sometimes blind to anything that doesn't serve her immediate goals. But deliberately compromising national security, knowingly working with foreign intelligence, that requires a different kind of motivation, a different kind of calculation. I need to determine which kind she's capable of." "You're investigating your own wife." "I'm protecting national security and trying to keep someone I care about from destroying herself. Sometimes those objectives align. Sometimes they conflict. Today, we find out which." We reached a checkpoint where armed security verified our identities before allowing passage into the facility's classified section. The atmosphere had shifted palpably. Gone was the corporate hospitality, replaced by military precision and the particular tension that accompanies potential security breaches. General Rivera met us in the corridor outside the briefing room, his face carved from granite. "Whitmore, glad you're here. This situation is rapidly evolving in directions I don't like." "Brief me." "The Morrison-Fletcher targeting system integrated with our Sentinel platform exactly as specified. Passed all preliminary tests. But during the live demonstration, it didn't just miss the target, it actively fed false data into the fire control system. If we'd been in actual combat conditions, that false data would have directed our countermeasures away from genuine threats, leaving you exposed. Completely. And the failure pattern suggests intimate knowledge of Sentinel's architecture, not just the publicly available specifications, but the classified redundancy systems, the fail-safe protocols, everything that's supposed to prevent exactly this kind of compromise. Someone gave Morrison-Fletcher access to classified Sentinel details. Or Morrison Fletcher obtained them through other means, Rivera said grimly. Either way, we have a serious breach. The question is whether your wife is a victim or a perpetrator. Through the briefing room window, I could see Sarah sitting at a large table, Gerard beside her, both facing a row of stern military officers and corporate lawyers. She looked small, diminished, nothing like the confident executive who'd commanded the earlier presentation. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her, and even from this distance I could see them shaking. Let me talk to her, I said. Alone. 5 minutes. Rivera studied me. You understand that anything she tells you in there becomes part of an active security investigation? That your relationship doesn't create any kind of privilege or protection? I understand. And you're willing to participate in that investigation, even if it means incriminating your wife. The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Was I willing to choose duty over marriage, security over love, the work I dedicated my life to over the woman I'd planned to spend that life with? I'm willing to find the truth, I said finally. Whatever that truth looks like, wherever it leads. That's what I've always done. That's what I'll keep doing. Rivera nodded slowly. 5 minutes. We'll be monitoring. I wouldn't expect otherwise. He opened the briefing room door, spoke quietly to the assembled personnel. They filed out, leaving only Sarah sitting at that table, small and scared and so very different from the woman who'd dismissed me as just a driver 6 hours ago. I entered the room, heard the door close behind me with a finality that seemed to echo. Sarah looked up, and the expression on her face broke something in me. Hope, maybe, or recognition, or the desperate need to believe I might help her out of whatever nightmare she'd found herself in. Daniel, she whispered. They think I'm a spy. They think I deliberately sabotaged their systems. They're talking about espionage charges, about treason, about... Her voice broke. I didn't do anything wrong. I swear to you, I just designed what they asked for. Just followed the specifications. I don't understand how this happened. I pulled out the chair across from her, sat down, studied her face for tells, for signs of deception, for any indication that this performance was calculated rather than genuine. My training screaming at me to analyze, to assess, to maintain professional distance. But she was still my wife, still the woman I'd loved enough to step away from a career I valued for the promise of partnership, still the person I'd spent 3 years protecting, even as she'd systematically diminished me. Sarah, I said quietly, I need you to tell me everything about this contract. Every meeting, every specification document, every person you talk to, especially every interaction with Gerard Hoffman. And I need you to understand that I'm not asking as your husband. I'm asking as someone who might be the only thing standing between you and a federal prison cell. Her eyes widened, the last of her denial crumbling. You're one of them. You're investigating me. I'm trying to save you, I corrected, but I can only do that if you're completely honest with me. If you tell me things you might not want to admit, things that might make you look bad, or naive, or complicit. Can you do that? She stared at me across the table, tears beginning to track down her carefully made-up face. I don't know if I can trust you anymore. You never really trusted me, I said, and the truth of it sat between us like a physical thing. You trusted the version of me you created, the safe version, the diminished version, the one who couldn't possibly threaten your professional identity, but that version never existed. Sarah, it was just a role I played because I loved you enough to let you need it. And now? Now, I said, we find out what's real. What's left when the illusions burn away, starting with the truth about Gerard Hoffman and how Morrison Fletcher really won this contract. The monitoring system hummed quietly in the background, recording everything, transmitting to analysts and investigators and people whose job it was to determine guilt or innocence based on word choice and body language and the particular quality of desperation in someone's voice. Sarah took a shaky breath and began to talk. Sarah's confession unfolded like a slow-motion car crash, inevitable, devastating, impossible to look away from. I sat across from her in that sterile briefing room, watching her carefully constructed professional identity disintegrate with each admission, each reluctant revelation, each moment of recognition that she'd been played more thoroughly than she could have imagined. Gerard approached me 9 months ago, she began, her voice unsteady but gaining strength as she committed to the telling. At a defense industry conference in Munich, he said he represented a consortium of European defense ministries interested in modernizing their NATO-compatible systems. Said he'd been impressed by my work on the Aegis integration project, that Morrison Fletcher had a reputation for innovative solutions. And you believed him, I said, keeping my voice neutral, analytical rather than accusatory. Why wouldn't I? His credentials checked out, diplomatic passport, letters of introduction from the Belgian Ministry of Defense, references from 3 NATO liaison officers. I had our security team vet everything before I even took the first meeting. She looked at me with something like desperation. I wasn't careless, Daniel. I followed protocols. But you wanted the opportunity. She flinched at that but didn't deny it. Yes, I wanted it. This was the kind of contract that makes careers, the kind of project that moves you from senior VP to C-suite consideration, the kind of success that proves you belong at the top table. So when Gerard started asking questions, detailed, technical questions about our defense architecture, you answered them. They were legitimate questions. Her voice rose defensively. Questions that any serious buyer would need answered to evaluate system compatibility. I gave him exactly the kind of information we share with cleared foreign military customers. Nothing classified, nothing beyond the standard technical disclosures. I leaned forward, holding her gaze. Sarah, I need you to think very carefully about the next question. Did Gerard ever ask you questions that seemed to go beyond standard technical specifications? Questions about redundancy systems, fail-safe protocols, classified architecture details that wouldn't normally be discussed with foreign buyers? She opened her mouth, closed it, and I watched the realization dawn. The security protocols, she whispered. He asked about the security protocols, said his technical team needed to understand how our systems would integrate with existing NATO security architectures, wanted to know about the verification systems, the fail-safe mechanisms, the redundancy checks. And you told him. She pressed her hands against her face, breathing hard. I gave him access to technical documentation, Level 3 clearance materials, still not classified at the highest levels, but detailed enough to understand system architecture. Jesus, Daniel, Jesus Christ. What did you get in return? Specifications, requirements documents, purchase orders indicating serious intent. He said the consortium wanted to move quickly, that there were competing proposals from Raytheon and BAE Systems, that Morrison Fletcher needed to demonstrate rapid response capability to win the contract. So you accelerated your development timeline. Yes, cut corners on some of the standard validation processes, used preliminary test data instead of full verification protocols. Gerard said the consortium had their own testing facilities, that they'd conduct final validation in Belgium before full deployment. Her voice was hollow now, empty of the confidence that usually defined it. He made it sound reasonable, like standard international contracting procedure. And the demonstration today was supposed to be the final proof of concept. Show that our targeting system could integrate seamlessly with existing U.S. military platforms, which would validate its compatibility with NATO systems. Gerard said he had observers who would be evaluating the demonstration remotely, that a successful test would trigger immediate contract signature. I sat back, pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. Sarah, you weren't selling to NATO. You were providing detailed architectural information to foreign intelligence services who used that information to design a targeted attack on our defense systems. Gerard Hoffman isn't a defense attaché. He's an intelligence officer, probably Russian or Chinese, using you as an unwitting asset to compromise one of our most critical defense platforms. The color drained from her face entirely. No, that's not. I vetted him. We vetted him. The credentials were real. The credentials were real because they were provided by an actual foreign ministry that's been penetrated by intelligence services. It's a standard approach. Use legitimate institutional access to establish credibility, then exploit that credibility to gain trust and extract information. You weren't careful enough, Sarah. You were so focused on winning the contract, on advancing your career, on proving yourself, that you didn't see the manipulation. But I didn't give him classified information, she insisted, grasping for any defense. Everything I shared was cleared for foreign military sales. I checked. I made sure. You gave him enough information to understand system architecture, enough to identify vulnerabilities, enough to design a targeted attack that exploited those vulnerabilities. The fact that each individual piece of information was technically cleared doesn't matter when you aggregate them into a comprehensive intelligence package. She made a sound that was half sob, half denial. I'm not a traitor. I didn't mean to. Intent doesn't matter in espionage cases, I said, and the harshness in my voice surprised even me. Impact matters. Results matter. You compromised a critical defense system because you were so obsessed with your own advancement that you didn't stop to question whether something that seemed too good to be true actually was. You're going to let them arrest me. It wasn't a question. You're going to sit there and watch them destroy my life because I made mistakes. I'm going to find the truth, I corrected. All of it, including whether this was genuine naivete or something more calculated. Her eyes went wide with shock and hurt. You think I did this deliberately? You think I would knowingly betray my country for a contract? I think I don't know you as well as I thought I did, I said quietly. I think the woman I married wouldn't have been capable of this level of reckless ambition. But the woman you've become over the past 3 years, the one who systematically erased me from her life, the one who valued career advancement over every other consideration, I honestly don't know what she's capable of anymore. The words landed like physical blows. Sarah recoiled as if I'd struck her, tears flowing freely now, her careful makeup streaking. How can you say that? How can you sit there and judge me when you've been lying to me for 3 years? Playing house husband while secretly maintaining your intelligence career? You don't get to claim moral high ground, Daniel. You're right, I acknowledged. I don't. I played my own games, maintained my own deceptions. But my deceptions were designed to protect national security while supporting your ambitions. Yours were designed purely for personal advancement, regardless of the cost. There's a difference. Is there? Her voice turned sharp, bitter. Or is that just what you tell yourself to feel superior? You kept secrets. You let me believe lies. You manipulated me just as much as Gerard did. You just did it from inside the marriage instead of outside it. The accusation stung because it carried truth. I had manipulated her perception, had carefully constructed a version of myself that served my purposes while allowing her to believe what she needed to believe. The difference was one of intent and impact, but maybe that distinction was thinner than I'd convinced myself. Before I could respond, the briefing room door opened. General Rivera entered, his expression grim, followed by 2 people I recognized immediately, Special Agent Caroline Masters from FBI Counterintelligence and someone I'd hoped never to see in this context. Deputy Director James Thornton from the CIA's Counterintelligence Center. Mr. Whitmore, Thornton said, his voice carrying that particular bureaucratic coldness that CIA administrators perfected. We need to speak with you, separately. I stood looking down at Sarah one last time. Her face was ravaged with tears and fear, and the dawning comprehension of just how comprehensively her life was about to be dismantled. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to promise that somehow this would be okay, but that would be another lie, another manipulation, and I'd committed to truth no matter how painful. Tell them everything, I said. Complete cooperation is your only path forward now. Every meeting with Gerard, every document you shared, every conversation you remember. Hold nothing back. Will you, she started, then stopped, perhaps realizing she had no right to ask for my help, my protection, my intervention. I'll do what needs to be done, I said, which was both promise and threat, both reassurance and warning. I followed Thornton and Masters into an adjacent secure conference room. This one was different. No windows, electromagnetic shielding in the walls, the kind of space where conversations happened that never officially occurred. Thornton waited until the door sealed before speaking. You knew about Morrison Fletcher, about the compromise operation, about Gerard Hoffman. You've known for months. 6 months, I confirmed. Since Morris and Fletcher first appeared on our foreign intelligence contact watch lists, I initiated discreet surveillance, started tracking their international business development activities, monitoring communication patterns. Masters leaned against the wall, arms crossed. And you didn't think to mention that your wife was the primary point of contact for a suspected intelligence operation? I reported the company activity through proper channels. The fact that my wife worked there was disclosed in my initial intelligence report. What I didn't do was compromise an ongoing investigation by alerting her or taking action that might have spooked the operation before we understood its full scope. That's one interpretation, Thornton said coldly. Another interpretation is that you deliberately allowed your wife to continue compromising national security because shutting it down would have damaged her career and your marriage. The accusation hung in the air, sharp and potentially devastating. If they decided I'd prioritize personal considerations over national security, my clearances would be revoked, my career would end, and I'd potentially face criminal charges for dereliction of duty. That interpretation would be incorrect, I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger building in my chest. I maintained surveillance on the operation specifically to understand its full scope before interdiction. If I'd shut it down 6 months ago, we'd have arrested one low-level intelligence officer and never understood the full network behind him. By allowing it to proceed under controlled observation, we now have detailed documentation of the entire approach methodology, complete contact chains, and evidence of which specific information they were targeting. And the cost of that decision, Masters interjected, is that your wife is now facing espionage charges and a potential 20-year prison sentence. The cost of that decision, I corrected, is that we prevented a critical defense system from being compromised in actual combat conditions, identified a significant foreign intelligence operation, and gathered evidence that will allow us to roll up an entire network of similar penetration attempts. My wife's legal jeopardy is unfortunate, but secondary to those national security objectives. Thornton studied me with cold calculation. You're a ruthless son of a bitch. Whitmore, I'd forgotten how ruthless. I'm effective, I said. There's a difference. Is there? He echoed Sarah's earlier question, the same doubt about my moral clarity. Because from where I'm sitting, you just sacrificed your wife's freedom and future to protect your professional reputation and maintain an intelligence operation. From where I'm sitting, I replied, my voice hardening, I did my job, the job I've been doing for 15 years. The job I continued doing even after officially stepping back because people like you needed someone willing to operate in spaces that official channels couldn't access. You can question my methods, you can judge my choices. But you can't question my results or my dedication to protecting this country, even if it means destroying your marriage. My marriage was already destroyed, I said quietly. It died somewhere in the past 3 years when partnership became hierarchy and support became subservience. Today just made the corpse visible. Masters shifted uncomfortably. That's harsh. It's true, Sarah stopped seeing me as a partner years ago. I became a convenience, a support structure for her ambitions. And I let it happen because I convinced myself that loving someone meant accommodating their needs, even when those needs erased me. That was my mistake, not prioritizing the intelligence operation over her career, but believing our marriage could survive that kind of fundamental imbalance. Thornton pulled out a chair, sat down with the air of someone settling in for a longer conversation. So what now? We have your wife on multiple counts of unauthorized disclosure of defense information. We have Gerard Hoffman, real name probably Grigory Volkov, SVR officer operating under diplomatic cover, on U.S. soil conducting intelligence operations. We have a compromised defense contractor that's going to face congressional investigations and possible criminal charges. How do you recommend we proceed? Hoffman's still here? I asked, suddenly of alert. He hasn't fled? Not yet. We locked down the facility as soon as the demonstration failed. He's currently in a holding room, claiming diplomatic immunity and demanding contact with the Belgian embassy, which he'll get, and then he'll be quietly expelled rather than prosecuted because nobody wants the diplomatic nightmare of a trial. Probably, Thornton admitted, unless we can flip him. get him to cooperate, provide information about his network, identify other active operations. He won't flip, I said with certainty. SVR officers at his level are too well trained, too ideologically committed. Arrest him, document everything for the intelligence file, then let the State Department arrange his departure. The real value isn't in prosecuting him, it's in understanding the operation well enough to identify and prevent similar approaches. And your wife? Masters asked quietly. I was silent for a long moment, weighing options, calculating outcomes, trying to separate professional judgment from personal emotion. She's naive rather than malicious, ambitious rather than treasonous, used rather than recruited. A good prosecutor could make an espionage case, but the reality is she's a victim of her own blind spots and a sophisticated intelligence operation. You're advocating for leniency? I'm advocating for proportional response. Sarah made serious mistakes driven by career ambition and inadequate security awareness. She should face professional consequences, loss of clearances, termination from Morrison Fletcher, industry blacklisting. But federal prison? That should be reserved for people who deliberately betrayed their country, not people who were manipulated into doing so through their own weaknesses. Thornton tapped his fingers on the table, considering. The optics are difficult. Defense contractor, employee compromises critical military system. If we don't prosecute vigorously, it looks like we're soft on security breaches. Then prosecute Morrison Fletcher as a corporate entity. Massive fines, oversight requirements, contract cancellations. Make them the example. Sarah becomes a footnote, the employee who was used to facilitate the breach but cooperated fully with investigators once the scheme was revealed. And her cooperation, Masters said slowly, understanding dawning, provides the basis for a cooperation agreement that keeps her out of prison. Exactly, she gives you everything about her interactions with Hoffman. Every meeting, every document, every question he asked. You use that to build a comprehensive profile of SVR approach methodology. She accepts responsibility, loses her career, but avoids incarceration. Everyone gets something. Except you, Thornton observed. You get a wife whose career you just destroyed. I get a wife who's alive and free rather than in federal imprisonment, I corrected. That's not nothing. Even though your marriage is over? I thought about Sarah in that other room, crying and terrified, and facing the consequences of choices driven by ambition. I'd enabled by playing the diminished husband, by letting her believe I was less than I was, by not forcing harder conversations about priorities and values and what actually mattered. Especially because it's over, I said finally. At least this way we both survive it. Okay, the rain had finally stopped by the time the immediate crisis reached its temporary conclusion. I stood in the facility parking lot watching the sun break through dissipating clouds, creating steam that rose from the wet pavement like ghosts of the day's revelations. Behind me, the facility hummed with the controlled cadence of a major security incident. Investigators documenting everything, lawyers preparing statements, public affairs officers crafting carefully worded press releases that would say everything and nothing simultaneously. Gerard Hoffman, or whatever his real name was, had been escorted from the facility an hour ago, flanked by State Department officials, and headed toward diplomatic expulsion and persona non grata status. He'd maintained his cover story to the end, righteous indignation about American paranoia and mistreatment of legitimate European defense officials, professional to the last. I almost respected the commitment to the performance. Even as I cataloged every detail of his methodology for the counterintelligence database, Sarah was still inside, giving her formal statement to FBI investigators, walking through every interaction with Hoffman in exhaustive detail. Elizabeth Chen had told me it would take hours, possibly extending into the evening. The kind of debriefing that left you emptied out, every memory excavated and examined, every conversation dissected for meaning and implication. I'd told them everything I knew, provided my surveillance reports, detailed the intelligence operation from my perspective. My cooperation had been noted, my conduct during the investigation deemed appropriate, if coldly calculated. Deputy Director Thornton had made it clear that while I wouldn't face charges, My decision to let the operation proceed while my wife remained unwittingly involved would be a permanent mark on my record. Some people would question whether I'd maintained proper boundaries. Some would wonder if I'd let personal considerations affect my professional judgment. They could wonder all they wanted. I knew the truth, that I'd done exactly what needed to be done, that the intelligence gained outweighed the personal cost, that national security sometimes required sacrifices that looked like cruelty from the outside, but were actually mercy in the long run. My phone buzzed, a secure message from a number I recognized. Director Carmichael finally reaching out directly rather than through intermediaries. Your wife's cooperation agreement approved. No jail time. Career destruction sufficient penalty. Effective immediately. You're reinstated to active operational status. Report Monday for briefing on new assignment. Well done, even if the methods were unorthodox. Well done. As if destroying my marriage and my wife's career was an accomplishment worth celebrating. As if the hollowness in my chest was professional satisfaction rather than grief for what might have been, what we'd once promised each other before ambition and deception and mutual blindness had eroded everything we'd built. I typed a brief acknowledgement, then pocketed the phone. Monday felt impossibly far away and simultaneously too close. A return to official status. To the work that had always defined me more than the marriage ever had. Perhaps that was the real truth we'd both been avoiding. That we'd each loved our work more than we'd loved each other. That our marriage had been convenient scaffolding for careers rather than the foundation either of us actually needed. Mr. Whitmore? A voice behind me. I turned to find Colonel Patterson, the facility commander, approaching with what looked like genuine sympathy in his expression. I wanted to apologize for the difficulties today. If we'd known about your wife's involvement in the compromise, we would have structured the demonstration differently. Not your fault, Colonel. You were operating with the information you had. Still, it can't be easy watching your spouse face federal investigation. He paused, measuring his words. For what it's worth, the intelligence community is grateful for your continued service. The work you've been doing these past 3 years, the independent analysis, the threat assessments, it's made a real difference. People don't always say it, but your contributions matter. Appreciated, I said, meaning it. Patterson was career military, someone who understood sacrifice and duty and the cost that came with choosing service over personal comfort. General Rivera mentioned that you'll be returning to active operational status. If you need anything during that transition, references, clearances, expedited, anything at all, my office is available. Thank you, Colonel. That means more than you might know. He nodded, started to leave, then turned back. My wife left me 8 years ago, said she couldn't handle the deployments, the secrets, the parts of my life she wasn't cleared to know about. Hardest thing I ever went through, harder than combat, honestly, because at least in combat you know who the enemy is. I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be, Tata. Best thing that ever happened to me in retrospect. Taught me that some people are built for this life, and some aren't. That trying to maintain relationships with people who need you to be less than you are, it's not love, it's slow death by accommodation. He met my eyes directly. You'll be okay, Whitmore. Maybe not today, maybe not for a while, but you'll be okay. He walked away before I could respond, leaving me alone with his uncomfortable wisdom. Slow death by accommodation. That's exactly what it had been, wasn't it? 3 years of making myself smaller, quieter, less significant, all in service of Sarah's need to be the important one, the successful one, the one who mattered most. And she'd never even noticed. Never asked what I was sacrificing, what it cost me to play the diminished husband, whether I was happy or fulfilled or slowly suffocating under the weight of her indifference. The facility doors opened and Sarah emerged, flanked by her lawyer, a criminal defense attorney Morrison Fletcher had provided, presumably to protect the company as much as to protect her. She looked devastated, aged years in a single day, her professional armor completely stripped away to reveal the fragile person underneath. Our eyes met across the parking lot. Neither of us moved at first, both recognizing that whatever conversation came next would fundamentally alter the trajectory of our lives. Finally, she dismissed her lawyer with a quiet word, then walked toward me with slow, deliberate steps, as if approaching something dangerous and unpredictable. "They're letting me go," she said when she reached me, her voice hoarse from hours of talking. "No criminal charges, cooperation agreement, professional suicide, but no prison time." "I know. I advocated for that outcome." Her laugh was bitter, broken. "Of course you did. You orchestrated this entire thing, didn't you? Let me walk into their trap, documented everything, waited until I'd compromised myself thoroughly enough to need your intervention, then swooped in to save me just enough to salve your conscience." "That's not—" I started, then stopped. Was it? Had I unconsciously choreographed this outcome, engineered a situation where Sarah would need me while simultaneously proving she'd never really valued what I offered? "I don't know," I admitted finally. "Maybe. Maybe some part of me wanted you to understand what you'd dismiss so casually, what you'd reduce to just a driver." "Well, congratulations. I understand now. You're important, connected, powerful, everything I thought I was becoming, while you were actually the one who mattered all along." She wrapped her arms around herself, defensive and small. "Does that make you feel better, knowing that you won? This isn't winning, Sarah. This is both of us losing. Losing the marriage, the trust, the partnership we promised each other. I don't feel victorious. I feel empty." "Then why did you do it? Why let me walk into that demonstration knowing it would fail? Knowing I'd be blamed? You could have warned me, stopped me, protected me from this." "Could I?" I asked, genuinely uncertain. "If I told you Gerard was an intelligence officer, that you were being used, that you needed to shut down the entire contract, would you have believed me, or would you have thought I was jealous, threatened by your success, trying to sabotage your career advancement?" She opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. We both knew the answer. She wouldn't have believed me, would have seen any warning as competition, as my insecurity about her success, as another attempt to make myself relevant in a marriage where she'd decided I was peripheral. "So instead, you let me destroy myself," she said quietly. "Let me compromise national security, face federal investigation, lose everything I'd built, because teaching me a lesson is more important than protecting me." "I protected you," I corrected, heat entering my voice for the first time. "I spent 6 months monitoring that operation to make sure it didn't succeed, didn't actually compromise critical systems, didn't put you in genuine legal jeopardy. I documented everything to build a case that you were a victim rather than a willing participant. I negotiated your cooperation agreement, convinced the FBI and CIA that prosecution would be disproportionate. Every step of this process, I was protecting you from the consequences of your own blind ambition, while simultaneously exposing that ambition for everyone to see." "Yes," I admitted, "because the alternative was letting you continue on a path that would have eventually led somewhere worse. Gerard Hoffman wasn't the end of this, Sarah. He was the beginning. If you'd succeeded with this contract, there would have been others. More requests for information, more pressure to share details, more compromises that seemed reasonable until you look back and realized you'd walked so far over the line you couldn't even see it anymore. You don't know that. I do know that. I've seen it happen dozens of times. Good people making small compromises that lead to bigger ones, chasing success and advancement until they wake up one day and realize they've become someone they don't recognize, someone who values achievement over integrity, status over security, personal gain over collective responsibility." The words hung between us, sharp and true and painful, because we both knew I wasn't just talking about potential futures. I was describing who she'd already become, the woman who'd valued her career advancement so highly, she'd stopped seeing the people around her as anything other than tools or obstacles, who'd reduced her husband to convenient support staff and never questioned whether that was sustainable or fair or even sane. "I loved you," she said, and the past tense landed like a death knell. "I loved you so much when we got married. You were brilliant and dedicated and so clear about what mattered to you. And then you gave it all up for me, for us, and I was grateful, but also—" She trailed off, searching for words. "Also relieved," I finished for her, "because my success didn't threaten yours. My achievements didn't compete with yours. I was safely diminished, comfortably less important, no challenge to your professional identity." "That's not fair." isn't it? Be honest, Sarah. Maybe for the first time in years, when I told you I was stepping back from my government position, when I said I wanted to focus on our marriage and be more available, were you relieved? Did some part of you think, finally, I can stop competing with his career and just focus on mine? She was crying again, silent tears that tracked down her face without sound or drama. Yes, she whispered, God help me, yes. I was relieved, because being married to you when you were at your peak was exhausting. Everything was classified. Everyone treated you with this deference I hadn't earned yet. And I loved you, but I also resented that your importance was assumed while mine had to be constantly proven. So when I stepped back, I got to be the important one, the successful one, the one people respected and courted and wanted access to. And you, she looked at me with something like grief. You just disappeared into the background, became scenery in my life rather than a partner in it. And I let that happen because it was comfortable, because it served my needs, because I'm exactly as selfish and shallow as you're implying. I'm not trying to hurt you, I said, meaning it. I'm trying to be honest about what happened to us, how we got here. We got here because you lied to me for 3 years about who you were and what you were doing. And you lied to yourself for 3 years about who I was and what I deserved. We both constructed fictions, Sarah. Mine was about being less than I am. Yours was about me being less than I am. The difference is I knew I was pretending. You convinced yourself the pretense was reality. A black SUV pulled into the parking lot. FBI coming to transport Sarah back to the city for additional paperwork and formal charging decisions. The lawyer who'd been waiting near the entrance walked toward us, clearly preparing to reclaim his client. What happens now? Sarah asked, her voice small. With us, I mean. Is this it? Are we done? I looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in months. Saw the woman I'd loved underneath the corporate armor and the professional ambition. Saw also the fundamental incompatibility that had been there all along, papered over by good intentions and mutual accommodation until the paper tore and the underlying cracks became canyons. I don't know, I said honestly. I know I can't go back to being the invisible husband. I know you can't go back to the career you'd built. Everything's different now. We're different now. Or maybe we're finally showing each other who we've always been underneath the performances. So it's over. Maybe, probably. Does it matter if we name it right now, or can we just acknowledge that whatever comes next won't look anything like what came before? She nodded slowly, accepting the ambiguity even if it hurt. Will you be okay? Financially, I mean. Without my income, I'll be fine. I have my own income. Always have, actually. Another thing you never asked about because it didn't fit your narrative of the dependent husband. She flinched at that but didn't argue. The lawyer was close now, politely waiting for our conversation to conclude so he could reclaim his client and continue managing the crisis. Sarah, I said, catching her hand before she could leave. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Sorry this happened to you. Sorry I couldn't find a better way to protect you while also doing my job. Sorry we couldn't figure out how to be partners instead of competitors or caretaker and burden. Me too, she whispered. For all of it. For not seeing you. For not valuing what you gave up. For building my success on your diminishment and never questioning whether that was okay. We'll talk soon. Figure out the logistics. But first you need to get through the legal process, and I need to... I trailed off, unsure how to finish. Return to your real life? She suggested with a sad smile. The one you've been living all along while I thought you were just existing in mine. Something like that. She squeezed my hand once, then let go and walked toward the waiting SUV. I watched her leave, this woman I'd loved and lost and perhaps never really known at all, carrying with her the wreckage of shared dreams and separate ambitions, and the uncomfortable truth that sometimes love isn't enough when the people loving each other can't see past their own reflections. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if I'd been capable of appreciating them. Instead, I just felt tired, hollowed out, ready for this day to end so I could begin whatever came next. My phone buzzed again. Another message, this one from a contact I hadn't heard from in years. Heard about today. Rough situation. If you need a place to decompress before Monday's reinstatement, the cabin in Shenandoah is available. No questions, no judgment, just space to breathe. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a single word. Thanks. Sometimes survival was enough. Sometimes putting one foot in front of the other was the only achievement that mattered. Sometimes the best you could do was acknowledge the wreckage and keep walking toward whatever tomorrow might bring. The cabin in Shenandoah belonged to Marcus Webb, a former colleague from my early days at the agency, back when fieldwork still meant something tangible, when intelligence gathering involved human contact rather than algorithmic analysis and satellite surveillance. Marcus had retired 5 years ago to teach security studies at Georgetown, but he'd kept the cabin as a refuge, a place where people like us could go when the weight of secrets and compromises became too heavy to carry in the world of normal human interaction. I arrived after dark, navigating the winding mountain roads by memory more than sight. The cabin appeared through the trees like something from another time. Rough-hewn logs, stone chimney, solar panels discreetly mounted on the southern slope of the roof. Modern sustainability hidden inside rustic aesthetic. Very much like Marcus himself, come to think of it. He was waiting on the porch, bourbon already poured, 2 glasses catching the light from inside. Tall, lean, gray-bearded now, wearing the kind of comfortable flannel that marked him as someone who no longer needed to impress anyone with his competence or authority. "You look like hell," he said by way of greeting. "Feel worse," I replied, accepting the glass he offered. The bourbon was excellent, 20-year Pappy Van Winkle, the kind of thing Marcus saved for occasions that required serious drinking. "That good, huh?" We sat in the porch rockers, looking out at darkness and trees and the distant lights of the valley below. Silence stretched between us, comfortable and familiar, the kind of quiet that came from years of shared experience and mutual understanding that some things didn't need explanation. "You want to talk about it?" Marcus asked eventually, not pushing, just offering. "Not particularly. Want me to talk about anything else to distract you?" "That might help." So Marcus talked about his classes at Georgetown, about the brilliant students and the mediocre ones, about how teaching intelligence history to people who'd grown up with smartphones and social media was both easier and harder than he'd expected. About his daughter's wedding last fall, his son's promotion at Google, his ex-wife's remarriage to someone he actually liked and respected. He talked about normal life, civilian life, the kind of existence that felt simultaneously appealing and impossible to someone like me. A life where secrets weren't currency, where relationships didn't require security clearances, where you could tell people what you did for a living without layers of cover stories and convenient omissions. "You thinking about getting out?" Marcus asked perceptively. "Really out this time?" Because stepping back while maintaining clearances isn't getting out. It's just changing your office location. "Thornton wants me back full-time. Active operational status. Monday briefing for new assignment." "And you're considering it?" "I don't know what else to do," I admitted. "This is what I know, what I'm good at. Take that away and I'm just..." "What?" "A guy with skills that don't translate to civilian applications in a marriage that just imploded?" "You're more than your work, Daniel. You've always been more than that, even if you couldn't see it." "Am I?" Because today suggested otherwise. Today suggested I'm exactly my work, that I'll sacrifice anything, including my marriage, my wife's career, any chance at normal human connection, for the mission, for the greater good, for whatever rationalization makes it feel noble instead of just cold. Marcus sipped his bourbon, considering. "You did what needed to be done. Sarah was compromised, whether she knew it or not. You couldn't let that operation succeed. Couldn't let Gerard Hoffman exploit her access to actually damage critical systems. I could have warned her earlier, could have intervened before she was in so deep." "Could you? Really? Would she have listened?" I thought about that question honestly, thought about the Sarah of 6 months ago, riding high on her professional success, convinced she'd finally broken through to the upper echelons of defense contracting, desperate to prove herself worthy of consideration for the C-suite. Would that Sarah have listened if I told her Gerard was a foreign intelligence officer? Would she have believed me, or would she have seen it as jealousy, as attempted sabotage of her success? "No," I said finally. she wouldn't have listened. She'd have thought I was lying, competing, trying to undermine her achievement. She'd stopped trusting me long before today. Stopped seeing me as someone whose judgment mattered. So you let her learn the hard way. I protected her while she learned. There's a difference, is there? Because from where you're sitting, it doesn't feel like there is. He wasn't wrong. The protection I'd offered, documenting her innocence, building the case for cooperation rather than prosecution, negotiating her agreement with FBI and CIA, it all felt hollow measured against the destruction of her career, her reputation, her carefully constructed professional identity. Colonel Patterson told me his wife left him 8 years ago, I said, changing the subject slightly. Said it was the hardest thing he'd ever experienced. Harder than combat. Patterson's a good man, good officer. He understands the cost of this life better than most. He said trying to maintain relationships with people who need you to be less than you are is slow death by accommodation. That some people are built for this work and some aren't. He's right. Marcus poured more bourbon into both our glasses. I learned that the hard way too. My marriage ended for the same reasons yours is ending. Because I couldn't be fully honest about who I was and what I did, and she couldn't accept the parts of me she was allowed to see. The secrets weren't even the problem. The problem was that the secrets created a distance that eventually became a chasm. But you seem okay now, happy even. I am. Took years, therapy, accepting that I'd rather be alone and authentic than partnered and performing. But I got there. You will too, probably. Once you stop punishing yourself for being good at a job that requires certain kinds of ruthlessness. I destroyed my wife's life, I said quietly. That's not ruthlessness. That's cruelty dressed up as duty. Your wife destroyed her own life through blind ambition and willful ignorance. You just documented it and made sure the damage was contained. Don't confuse those two things, Daniel. Don't take responsibility for choices she made, patterns she established, priorities she set without consulting you or considering the consequences. We sat in silence again, the bourbon warming me from the inside while the mountain air chilled everything external. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, that lonely sound that marked territory and sought connection in equal measure. What was her name? I asked suddenly. Your ex-wife. You've never told me. Rachel, smart, beautiful, completely incompatible with my lifestyle once she understood what it actually meant. We met when I was teaching at the farm, before deep operational assignments. She fell in love with Professor Webb, the charming instructor. When she met Officer Webb, the one who disappeared for weeks without explanation, who couldn't discuss his work, who woke up with nightmares he couldn't share, that wasn't the man she'd married. Do you regret it? The marriage, I mean. No, we had good years before the bad ones. 2 amazing kids. Memories I treasure even though the ending was painful. You can't regret the whole thing just because it didn't last forever. That's not how life works. Sarah and I don't have kids. Don't have much of anything except 12 years of gradually growing apart while pretending we were growing together. You have what you learned about yourself, about relationships, about what you can tolerate and what you can't. That's not nothing. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah's lawyer confirming that formal charging decisions had been finalized. No prosecution, cooperation agreement signed, employment termination from Morrison Fletcher, effective immediately. All the official machinery of consequence grinding forward with bureaucratic efficiency. It's done, I went, showing Marcus the message. Officially over. Her career, the investigation, probably us. How do you feel? Empty, relieved, guilty, all of it simultaneously. I took another drink, the bourbon making everything slightly softer but no less painful. I keep thinking about 3 years ago, when I told her I was stepping back, when we talked about focusing on us and building something stable. I meant it. I genuinely believed we could create a partnership where both of us mattered equally, where support flowed both ways. What happened? She heard what she wanted to hear, that I was giving up, stepping down, accepting a lesser role so she could shine brighter. And I let her believe that because correcting her would have required confrontations neither of us wanted. So we built this elaborate fiction where I was the diminished husband and she was the rising star, and we both pretended that was sustainable. Until today, when the fiction exploded spectacularly. Until today, today, I agreed, when everyone learned that the diminished husband was actually still very much in the game, and the rising star had been used by foreign intelligence to compromise national security. Both our carefully maintained illusions destroyed in one afternoon. Marcus leaned back in his rocker, studying the stars beginning to emerge through breaks in the cloud cover. You know what the real tragedy is? Not that your marriage ended, but that it took something this catastrophic to force honesty between you. That you couldn't just talk to each other like adults before it reached the point of federal investigation and career destruction. I protested weakly. I asked questions. I suggested conversations. Did you? Marcus interrupted gently. Did you really try, or did you ask passive questions that were easy to deflect? Did you insist on being seen, or did you just quietly resent not being seen while continuing to accommodate her blindness? Because from what you're describing, you've been as complicit in the fiction as she was. You just told yourself your complicity was noble sacrifice rather than conflict avoidance. The words stung because they carried truth I'd been avoiding. I had avoided direct confrontation, had let conversations drop when they became uncomfortable, had settled for passive-aggressive accommodation rather than insisting on recognition and respect. I'd played the long game, documenting, observing, waiting for the right moment to reveal my continued relevance, rather than just demanding to be treated as an equal partner throughout. So we're both cowards, I said, just different flavors of cowardice. Not cowards, just human, just two people who couldn't figure out how to bridge the gap between who they were and who they needed each other to be. It happens more often than not, honestly. The marriages that work are the exceptions, not the rule. That's depressing. That's realistic. Love isn't enough if the people loving each other can't communicate honestly or see each other clearly. You and Sarah loved each other, maybe still do in some way, but you couldn't see each other. She saw the diminished version you performed. You saw the ambitious version she'd become. Neither of you looked closely enough to see the actual person underneath the performance. And now it's too late. Maybe, maybe not. But it's definitely too late for whatever you had before. That's gone. Question is whether you want to build something different from the wreckage, or whether you'd both be better off walking away entirely. I couldn't answer that. Didn't have enough emotional distance or clarity to know what I wanted beyond the immediate need to stop hurting, stop second-guessing every decision, stop replaying 3 years of careful deception, and wondering where else I could have chosen differently. We finished the bourbon in silence, then Marcus showed me to the guest room. Simple, clean, comfortable without being luxurious. A place to sleep without dreams or nightmares, though I suspected both would find me anyway. Daniel, Marcus said before leaving, whatever you decide about Monday, about reinstatement, about whether you stay in this work or finally walk away for real, make sure it's what you want, not just what you're good at. Being good at something doesn't mean you owe it your life. I don't know what I want anymore. Then figure it out. You've got the weekend to decompress, to think, to feel whatever you need to feel without performing strength or competence or unshakable dedication. Let yourself be uncertain. Let yourself grieve what you lost, even if you also know it needed to end. Just be human for a couple days before you put the armor back on. He closed the door, leaving me alone with my thoughts and regrets and the complicated truth that Marcus was right. I'd been performing for so long, I wasn't sure I remembered how to just exist without an audience or mission or greater purpose justifying my choices. I lay on the bed, still dressed, staring at the ceiling. My phone buzzed one more time, a message from Sarah. I know we probably shouldn't talk yet, but I need to say this. I'm sorry for all of it, for not seeing you, for taking you for granted, for building my success on your diminishment without questioning whether that was okay. You deserve better than what I gave you. I hope you find it, even if it's not with me. I read the message 3 times, feeling the sincerity in it, the genuine remorse, and also recognizing that remorse, however genuine, couldn't rebuild what we'd broken, couldn't restore trust that had eroded over years of small betrayals and mutual invisibility. I typed a response. I'm sorry too, for letting it get this far before forcing honesty, for manipulating circumstances rather than just insisting on respect, for being so committed to protecting you that I forgot to include you in the protection. We both deserve better than what we gave each other. Her response came quickly. What do we do now? I don't know, but we have time to figure it out. No rush, just heal first. Both of us. Okay. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Sarah. I set the phone aside and closed my eyes, surrendering finally to exhaustion and emotional overload, to the accumulated weight of a day that had started with rain and ended with wreckage, with truths revealed and illusions shattered, and the uncomfortable recognition that sometimes the cost of clarity was everything you thought you'd built. Outside, the mountain night settled into its ancient rhythms, wind through trees, creatures hunting and hiding, the slow, patient turning of the world that continued regardless of human drama or heartbreak or the price we paid for choosing duty over love, honesty over comfort, truth over convenient fiction. And in the morning, I'd have to decide who I wanted to be when the performance finally ended. I woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, sunlight streaming through windows I didn't remember opening. For a disoriented moment, I couldn't place where I was. Not the McLean townhouse, not a hotel, not any of the safe houses or temporary accommodations that had marked various operations over the years. Then memory returned in a flood. The facility, Sarah's confession, the wreckage of everything we'd built over 12 years. Marcus was in the kitchen when I emerged, cooking breakfast with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to take care of himself after divorce, dissolved the comfortable domestic arrangements of marriage. He glanced up, assessed me with one long look, then slid a mug of coffee across the counter without comment. You talk in your sleep, he said conversationally, returning his attention to the skillet. Nothing classified, fortunately. Just arguments with someone who wasn't there to argue back. Sarah. Figured. You were making some compelling points about mutual respect and partnership. She was losing badly, probably because you were controlling both sides of the conversation. He plated the bacon and eggs with more care than the simple meal required. Scrambled, okay? I don't do fancy. Scrambled is perfect. We ate at the small wooden table, morning light painting, everything gold and gentle. Gentle, the kind of peaceful domestic scene that felt surreal after yesterday's chaos. Normal life, I thought. This is what normal life looks like. People eating breakfast, drinking coffee, not discussing security breaches or failed marriages or the cost of choosing duty over every other consideration. So, Marcus said after we'd eaten in comfortable silence for several minutes. Monday, Director Carmichael's briefing, active operational status. You going? Don't know yet. That's more honest than I expected. I looked out the window at the mountains, at the morning mist burning off in the warming sun, at the natural beauty that existed completely independent of human drama or intelligence operations or marriages that imploded under the weight of accumulated deception. I've been doing this work for 15 years, I said slowly, thinking through it as I spoke. Since I was 25 years old, straight from grad school into analysis, then field work, then the kind of specialized consulting that doesn't have an official title because acknowledging it officially would create diplomatic complications. It's all I know, all I've ever been. But maybe Patterson was right. Maybe some people are built for this life and some aren't. And maybe I've been confusing competence for compatibility. I'm good at the work, exceptionally good, if we're being immodest about it. But good at something doesn't mean it's what I should be doing. Marcus refilled both our coffee mugs, settled back in his chair with the air of someone prepared for a longer conversation. When I left, he said, it wasn't because I'd stopped being good at it. It was because I'd stopped being able to separate Daniel Marcus Webb, the person, from Officer Webb, the intelligence professional. They'd merged so completely I couldn't remember which thoughts were mine and which were operational assessments. Couldn't have a conversation without analyzing it for subtext and manipulation. Couldn't meet someone without running threat assessments and background speculation. That sounds familiar, I admitted. Took me 2 years of civilian life to start thinking like a person again, instead of an intelligence officer. 2 years of deliberately not analyzing everything, not treating every interaction as potential intelligence gathering, not viewing relationships through the lens of utility and risk assessment. He smiled slightly. It was harder than any operational assignment I'd ever completed. Relearning how to just be, without a mission, without a clearance, without the identity I'd built my entire adult life around. Do you regret it? Leaving? No, but I don't regret the years I spent in the work either. Both were necessary. Both taught me things I needed to learn. The work taught me competence and discipline in how to operate under pressure. Civilian life taught me that competence isn't the same as fulfillment. That discipline can become a cage, and that sometimes the highest pressure situation is just being alone with yourself without a mission to distract you from your own thoughts. I absorbed this, recognizing the wisdom in it and also the challenge. What would I be without the work? Who was Daniel Whitmore when stripped of clearances and access and the particular identity that came from being someone important in invisible ways? Sarah used to joke, I said, surprising myself by bringing her up, that I was like a priest married to the church. Said I had this calling that superseded everything else, including our relationship. I always defended it, said it wasn't a calling, just a job I was good at and found meaningful. But maybe she was right. Maybe I've been treating it like a calling, like something sacred that justified any sacrifice. And now that sacrifice has cost you the marriage. Among other things, perspective maybe, humanity, the ability to see people as anything other than assets or threats or complications to be managed. I looked at Marcus directly. Be honest, am I damaged? Broken in ways that make normal human relationships impossible? Or can this be fixed? He considered the question seriously, didn't offer easy reassurance or comfortable lies. You're not broken, but you're definitely shaped by the work, by years of prioritizing mission over personal connection, by training that teaches you to control emotions rather than feel them fully. Can it be fixed? Maybe, but only if you want it fixed. Only if you're willing to do the hard work of becoming someone new instead of just the person the work made you. I don't know if I know how. Nobody knows how at first. That's what makes it hard. You fumble around, make mistakes, feel uncomfortable in your own skin because the comfortable patterns don't work anymore and the new patterns aren't established yet. It's like learning to walk again after an injury, slow, frustrating, occasionally humiliating, but possible. My phone buzzed, another message, this one from Deputy Director Thornton. Carmichael wants Monday meeting moved to Sunday evening. Urgent developments on Project Sentinel. Your presence required for threat assessment. I showed Marcus the message. He raised an eyebrow. Urgent developments the day after a major security breach. That's not suspicious at all. Probably fallout from yesterday. Implications we haven't identified yet. Secondary compromises. Something that came up during Hoffman's debriefing before expulsion. So what are you going to do? I looked at the message, then at the peaceful mountain morning visible through the window, then back at Marcus. I'm going to finish my coffee, then I'm going to go for a hike. Then I'm going to think about what I actually want instead of what I'm good at or what people expect or what seems like the logical next step. And the urgent developments? Can wait a few hours. The world won't end if Daniel Whitmore takes a morning to figure out his life before rushing back into crisis management mode. Marcus smiled. Good. That's the first genuinely human decision I've heard you make in this entire conversation. We cleaned up breakfast together, the simple domestic task somehow grounding in its ordinariness. Then I borrowed hiking boots and a jacket and headed out into the mountain morning, following trails Marcus had described. Moving through forest and meadow with no particular destination or timeline. The solitude was initially uncomfortable. No mission briefings to review mentally. No threat assessments to run. No next steps to plan or contingencies to consider. Just walking, breathing, existing in the moment without purpose beyond the immediate experience of movement and nature and silence. Gradually, the discomfort eased. My mind stopped racing through operational scenarios and started noticing actual sensory details. The way sunlight filtered through leaves, the sound of a creek running somewhere nearby, the particular clean smell of mountain air untainted by city pollution. Details I would normally catalog automatically without actually experiencing them. I reached a ridge overlooking the valley after about an hour of hiking, sat on an outcropping of rock, legs dangling over empty air, taking in the view without trying to analyze it for strategic advantage or security vulnerabilities. Just looking, being present, letting my mind wander without directing it toward productive outcomes. Sarah appeared in my thoughts, not as an operational complication or security risk, but as the person I'd married 12 years ago. The grad student who challenged my assumptions about Middle Eastern policy with data I hadn't considered. The young professional who'd laughed at my terrible jokes and made better ones. The woman who'd promised partnership and meant it, before ambition and my own deceptions had corrupted what we'd intended to build. I felt grief then, sharp and clean, for what we'd lost. Not just the marriage as it had been that needed to end, was already dead even before yesterday's revelations, but for what we'd promised each other and failed to maintain. For the partnership that could have been if we'd both been braver, more honest, more willing to fight for equality instead of accepting hierarchy. My phone buzzed again. I almost ignored it, committed to this moment of human feeling, uninterrupted by operational demands. But training overrode intention. I checked. Sarah, Morrison Fletcher terminated me this morning. Official statement blames me for security failures. Announces comprehensive review of all my projects. They're making me the scapegoat to save the company. Sarah, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to tell someone, and you're the only one who understands what really happened. Sarah, I'm scared, Daniel. Everything's falling apart. I sat with that for several minutes, feeling the pull of old patterns, the protective instinct, the problem solver impulse, the trained response to step in and fix things. But Marcus's words echoed. Let yourself be human for a couple days before you put the armor back on. I typed carefully. I'm sorry, that's unfair, but probably inevitable. Morrison Fletcher needs a narrative that protects the company. You're it. Her response came quickly. Will you help me? I know I don't deserve it, but I don't know what else to do. Help you how? I don't know. Figure out my options. Talk to your contacts. Just be on my side for once instead of on the mission side. The request was revealing. She still saw it as binary. Her side versus the mission side. Couldn't conceptualize that maybe there was a version where both could coexist, or more accurately, where neither side was the point and truth was the only thing that mattered. I'll always be on the side of truth, Sarah. If that helps you, then I'm helping you. If it doesn't, then we have a problem. But I won't lie or manipulate or compromise investigations to protect you from consequences you earned. Even though some of those consequences are my punishment for not seeing you, especially because of that, you need to understand that actions have costs, that using people has consequences, that building success on someone else's diminishment eventually catches up to you. I can't teach you those lessons by protecting you from them. A long pause, then, you're right. I know you're right. It just hurts. It should hurt. Pain is how we learn we've been doing something wrong. Sit with it. Feel it. Let it teach you something instead of running from it or demanding someone fix it. When did you become so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just tired of pretending harsh truths are cruelty instead of necessary medicine. Another pause. Then, thank you for being honest, for not just making it easier. You're welcome. Now let me go into. I'm sitting on a mountain trying to figure out my own life. You should probably do the same. Okay, be safe, Daniel. You too. I pocketed the phone and returned to the view, to the silence, to the slow work of untangling Daniel Whitmore, the person from Officer Whitmore, the intelligence professional. They'd been merged so long, I couldn't clearly see the seams anymore. Couldn't identify where one ended and the other began. But maybe that was the point. Maybe there were no seams, no clean separation. Maybe it was all just me, the competence and the coldness, the dedication and the distance, the ability to protect people while simultaneously destroying them in the name of greater goods and national security, and truths that needed revealing regardless of cost. Maybe the question wasn't whether I could separate person from professional, but whether I could integrate them in healthier ways. Could be competent without being cold, could be dedicated without being distant, could pursue truth without weaponizing it against people I claim to love. The sun had moved significantly when I finally stood up. Legs stiff from sitting, mind not settled, but at least clearer. I hiked back to the cabin, finding Marcus on the porch with a book and what looked like the same bourbon from last night. "Figure anything out?" he asked. "Maybe, still processing." "That's honest. What about Sunday evening, Carmichael's urgent meeting?" I thought about that, about rushing back into crisis mode, about letting urgent developments override the slow work of figuring out what I actually wanted, about choosing duty over everything else. Again, like I've been doing for 15 years without questioning whether that choice served me or just the mission. "I'm going to tell him I need until Monday morning," I said, "that I'll brief on Sentinel developments then. But tonight I'm unavailable. Personal crisis, family emergency. Whatever language makes them understand, I'm taking 12 hours for myself before diving back in." Marcus smiled. "Good, that's growth. Small maybe, but real. And if Carmichael says it can't wait, that national security requires my immediate presence, then you tell him that national security has required your immediate presence for 15 years, and 12 more hours won't compromise anything that wasn't already compromised by yesterday's breach. You tell him that Officer Whitmore will report Monday morning, sharp and ready, but tonight Daniel Whitmore needs space to breathe." I pulled out my phone, composed the message to Thornton with exactly that language, stared at it for a long moment before hitting send, feeling the weight of choosing myself over the mission for perhaps the first time in my career. The response came within minutes. "Carmichael won't like it, but approved. Monday, Euro 800. Don't be late. I won't be." I showed Marcus the exchange. He raised his glass in salute. "Welcome to being human, Daniel. It's uncomfortable as hell, but it's better than the alternative." "What's the alternative?" "Being so good at your job that you forget you're more than your job. Being so dedicated to the mission that you sacrifice everything else on its altar and call it nobility instead of recognizing it as fear." "Fear of what?" "Of being ordinary. Of not mattering in big, important ways. Of living a small, quiet life where your significance isn't measured by security clearances in presidential briefings. Of being just another person instead of someone special." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling out to disturb comfortable self-perceptions. Was that it? Was my dedication to the work really just fear of ordinariness dressed up as duty? Fear of discovering that without the clearances and access and importance, I was just unremarkable? "I don't know if I can be ordinary," I admitted. "Nobody's ordinary," Marcus said. "That's the lie we tell ourselves to justify pursuing extraordinary things at extraordinary costs. Everyone's remarkable in some way. You just have to figure out which ways matter to you when the performance ends and you're left alone with yourself." We sat in companionable silence as the sun began its descent toward evening, as the mountain shadows lengthened, as the world continued its patient turning regardless of human crisis or revelation or the uncomfortable work of becoming someone new. Monday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, frost on the grass, sky impossibly blue, the kind of perfect autumn weather that felt like nature's mockery of internal turmoil. I stood in front of my closet in the McLean townhouse, staring at suits and ties that represented different versions of myself. The operational officer, the government consultant, the diminished husband, the man Sarah had thought she married versus the man I'd actually been all along. She wasn't there. Had moved into a hotel downtown Saturday evening, citing the need for space and the uncomfortable weight of shared history in every room. The townhouse felt hollow without her presence, but also somehow more honest. No more pretending, no more performances, just empty rooms waiting to be filled with whatever came next. I selected the charcoal suit, the same one I'd worn to the facility demonstration last week. It felt appropriate somehow, circular, beginning and ending in the same costume, even if everything between had fundamentally shifted. My phone showed 3 messages. The first from Marcus. Remember, you don't owe them anything you're not willing to give. Choose yourself sometimes. The second from Sarah's lawyer. Mrs. Whitmore requests meeting this week to discuss separation terms. Please advise your availability and whether you've retained counsel. Mrs. Whitmore, not Mrs. Morrison Fletcher, the hyphenated name apparently among the casualties of her career destruction. I wondered if she'd chosen to drop it or if Morrison Fletcher had demanded it as part of her termination. One final reclamation of their brand from someone who'd become a liability. The third message was from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Whitmore, this is Elizabeth Chen from Site 7. I hope this isn't overstepping, but I wanted you to know that what you did last week, protecting your wife while also protecting national security, that kind of integrity is rare. Whatever you decide about your future, I hope you know you made a difference. Good luck with whatever comes next. I read that message 3 times, surprised by the unexpected validation. Chen had no reason to reach out, no obligation to offer support or recognition. That she'd done so anyway felt significant, a reminder that even in work defined by deception and manipulation, human decency sometimes broke through. I forwarded her message to Marcus with a brief note. Maybe I'm not entirely broken after all. His response came quickly. Never thought you were. Just thought you'd forgotten you were human underneath the competence. Keep remembering that today. The drive to Langley, because despite years of distributed operations and denial about official affiliations, that's ultimately where this conversation would happen, took me through familiar Virginia suburbs, past the exit for the townhouse I'd shared with Sarah, past the coffee shop where we'd had our first date, past all the geography of a marriage that had existed in physical space, even as it dissolved in emotional distance. I thought about that first date while sitting in morning traffic. Sarah had been 26, finishing her master's in international security policy, brilliant and intense, and so certain she was going to change the world through smart policy and dedicated service. I'd been 28, already 2 years into intelligence work, young enough to still believe the work was purely noble, that protecting national security was always the right choice regardless of personal cost. We talked for 4 hours that first meeting, closing down the coffee shop, continuing the conversation over dinner. Neither of us had planned. She'd challenged every assumption I'd made about Middle Eastern security architecture. I'd questioned her faith in institutional solutions to problems that required human intelligence and cultural understanding. We'd argued and laughed and recognized in each other something rare. Intellectual partnership wrapped in mutual attraction, wrapped in the promise of building something significant together. When had that promise broken? Was it gradual erosion over 12 years? Or were there specific moments, decision points where we'd chosen wrong, prioritized incorrectly, let small resentments calcify into permanent distance? Maybe both. Maybe all relationships ended through both sudden ruptures and slow dissolution, dramatic revelations and accumulated silences. The CIA's original headquarters building appeared through the trees like it always did, imposing, deliberately unremarkable, hiding immense power behind bureaucratic architecture. I went through security protocols that had become second nature, through clearance verification that marked me as someone with access rather than someone seeking it. Director Carmichael's office was exactly as I remembered from my last official briefing 2 years ago. Functional, minimal decoration beyond the required portraits and seals, windows that looked out at the internal courtyard rather than anything external. A deliberate metaphor, perhaps, the intelligence community looking inward, protecting its secrets from outside observation. Carmichael stood when I entered, extending his hand. Mid-50s, gray hair cut military short despite never serving in uniform, the kind of career intelligence professional who'd climbed the ladder through competence rather than politics. I respected him, even when I disagreed with his methods. Daniel, thank you for coming. Sir, I shook his hand, settled into the chair he indicated. Your message suggested urgency. There's always urgency. The question is whether it's genuine crisis or manufactured pressure to force decisions before proper analysis. He sat behind his desk, steepled his fingers, that particular gesture that meant he was preparing to deliver difficult information. Project Sentinel's compromise is worse than we initially assessed. How much worse? The targeting data your wife's company provided wasn't just flawed, it was specifically engineered to create cascading failures across integrated defense networks. If we deployed it as specified, one compromised system would have propagated false data to every connected platform. Entire regional defense architecture rendered useless. I felt cold recognition settle in my chest. That's not standard espionage. That's sabotage at strategic scale. Correct, which means Gerard Hoffman wasn't just collecting intelligence. He was positioning assets for active operations. The information your wife provided gave them exactly what they needed to understand our defensive vulnerabilities at system-wide level. How did we catch it? The demonstration failure? Was that intentional exposure or lucky discovery? Carmichael's expression suggested the answer was complicated. Both, actually. You want to tell him, or should I? I turned to find Deputy Director Thornton entering through a side door I hadn't noticed, carrying a classified folder marked with enough security warnings to make most people nervous just looking at it. The demonstration failed, Thornton said, settling into another chair, because someone coded a poison pill into the integration software. A small piece of corrupted data that would expose the system's fraudulent nature during testing, but wouldn't trigger in actual deployment conditions. Understanding dawned. Sarah, she didn't trust Gerard completely. Built in a failsafe. Not quite. Thornton opened the folder, pulled out technical documentation covered in annotations I recognized immediately. My annotations, from 6 months ago when I'd first started investigating Morrison Fletcher's foreign contacts. You built in the failsafe. The code analysis you submitted flagged potential vulnerabilities in their integration architecture. Our people at Site 7 used that analysis to insert monitoring code into their test environment. When Morrison Fletcher deployed their compromised system, our monitoring code caught the cascade failure pattern and forced an early failure. I stared at the documentation, at my own work coming back to protect systems I'd been monitoring from the shadows. So the demonstration didn't fail naturally. We made it fail to expose the compromise before it could deploy. Exactly, which means you didn't just document your wife's involvement. You actively prevented the sabotage from succeeding. Without your initial analysis, that system would have passed testing and deployed to operational platforms. We'd be looking at compromised continental defense architecture right now. The weight of that settled over me. I'd been so focused on Sarah's culpability, on the personal betrayal and professional compromise, that I hadn't fully processed what I'd actually prevented. Not just her career destruction, but actual strategic sabotage that could have cost lives in any conflict where those defense systems were required. You saved her, Carmichael said quietly. Saved her from being responsible for something infinitely worse than unauthorized disclosure. She thinks she's facing consequences for naivete and ambition. She has no idea how close she came to being part of actual military catastrophe. And we can't tell her, I said, understanding the security implications. Because explaining how we caught it would reveal monitoring capabilities we can't acknowledge. Correct, which means you have to live with knowing you protected her in ways she'll never understand or appreciate. Can you do that? Could I? Could I carry that knowledge that I'd saved Sarah from something far worse than she realized, without ever receiving credit or recognition for it? Without her understanding the full extent of what I'd protected her from? Yes, I said finally, because telling her wouldn't change anything, wouldn't make our marriage work, wouldn't restore trust or partnership, would just be another manipulation, another way of saying you owe me, when the whole problem is we've been keeping score instead of being partners. Carmichael nodded approvingly. Good. That's the answer I was hoping for. Which brings us to why you're really here. He pulled out another folder, this one even more heavily secured, marked with classifications I'd rarely seen outside of presidential briefings. Project Sentinel's compromise exposes a pattern. 11 other defense contractors have been approached by individuals matching Hoffman's profile over the past 18 months. All European nationals with legitimate government credentials. All targeting specific technologies that would, if compromised, create systemic vulnerabilities across NATO defense architecture. Coordinated campaign, I said. the pattern obvious now that I could see it. Not isolated intelligence gathering, orchestrated preparation for actual military operations. That's our assessment, which means we need someone to identify the full scope, track the network, determine which contractors have been successfully compromised versus which ones are still being cultivated. Someone who understands both the technical systems and the human vulnerabilities. Someone who can operate outside official channels, because this investigation will require activities that can't be officially acknowledged. You want me to hunt the network, I said. Identify every contractor, every foreign asset, every vulnerability they've created off of the books. We want you to save the architecture, Carmichael corrected, before someone decides to test whether our defenses actually work. This isn't about catching spies anymore, Daniel. This is about preventing the next generation of warfare from being decided before the first shot is ever fired. The mission was compelling, significant, exactly the kind of high-stakes strategic work I'd always excelled at. Everything I'd trained for, everything I was good at, wrapped in justified importance and national security necessity. And also exactly the kind of mission that would consume every hour, every thought, every piece of energy I had. That would make Monday's decision irrelevant because there would be no space left for figuring out who I was outside the work, no possibility of integration or balance or building anything resembling a normal life. I need to think about it, I said. Carmichael's eyebrows rose. This isn't the kind of mission that allows deliberation time. The network is active. Contractors are being compromised. Every day we delay is a day I spend considering whether accepting this mission means choosing the same path that destroyed my marriage and turned me into someone who manipulates everyone around him in service of greater goods that might not actually be as good as I've convinced myself. Silence fell over the office. Thornton looked shocked. Carmichael studied me with something between concern and respect. Marcus Webb got to you, Carmichael said finally, that weekend in the mountains. He told you that walking away was possible. He told me that being good at something doesn't mean I owe it my entire life, that competence isn't the same as calling, that maybe after 15 years of sacrificing everything for the mission, I've earned the right to ask whether the mission has earned that level of sacrifice. And your conclusion? I don't have one yet. That's why I need time to think. How much time? I considered that. How long did it take to decide whether to fundamentally restructure your entire identity, whether to walk away from work that mattered, that saved lives, that protected systems and nations, and the fragile architecture of security that most people never saw but depended on absolutely? A week, I said. 7 days to determine if I'm accepting this mission because it's genuinely what I want to do, or because it's comfortable and familiar and allows me to avoid the harder work of building a life outside the clearances and classifications and controlled operations. Carmichael exchanged a look with Thornton, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, he nodded. 1 week. But Daniel, this offer doesn't stay open indefinitely. If you decline, we'll find someone else. Won't be as good, won't have your instincts, but we'll make it work. You're not irreplaceable. No one is, I agreed. That's part of what I'm learning. I stood to leave, but Thornton stopped me. Your wife, Sarah. When you were negotiating her cooperation agreement, you could have pushed for harsher terms, could have let her face full prosecution, would have been justified given the severity of the compromise. Why didn't you? The question hung in the air, weighted with more than curiosity. Thornton was asking whether I could be trusted, whether personal feelings compromised professional judgment, whether I was the right choice for a mission that would require absolute dedication uncontaminated by human attachment. Because destroying her wouldn't have served any legitimate security purpose, I said carefully. It would have just been revenge dressed up as justice. And because I'm trying to learn the difference between necessary ruthlessness and cruelty disguised as duty. Still figuring out where that line is, honestly. But I know which side of it requires me to destroy someone I once loved just to prove I can put the mission first. Thornton nodded slowly. Fair answer, more honest than I expected. I left them there, 2 career intelligence professionals discussing whether I was still reliable, still useful, Still the kind of asset they could deploy with confidence that mission would always supersede everything else. The walk back through Langley's corridors felt different than it had 15 years ago when I'd first started this work. Then everything had been possibility, the chance to make a difference, to protect people, to operate at the highest levels of national security in service of ideals I genuinely believed in. Now it was just corridors, just buildings, just people doing jobs that mattered but weren't sacred, weren't callings that justified any sacrifice. Important work, certainly. Necessary work, probably, but not worth surrendering your entire humanity to accomplish. Outside, the November sun was brilliant and cold. I sat in my car in the parking lot, not ready to drive anywhere yet, just existing in the space between accepting the mission and declining it, between being Officer Whitmore, who saved nations, and Daniel Whitmore, who was just trying to figure out how to be human. My phone buzzed. Sarah, the lawyer says you haven't retained counsel yet. We should talk before this gets more complicated. I typed back, agreed. Coffee this week? Somewhere neutral? Wednesday afternoon? That place where we had our first date? Perfect, 2 p.m. I sat with that for a moment. The symmetry of it. Ending where we'd begun. Closing the circle of 12 years in the same coffee shop where we'd promised partnership and believed love would be enough. It hadn't been enough. But maybe recognizing that honestly was worth something. Maybe honesty was its own form of love. Harder, less comfortable, but ultimately more respectful than the careful lies we told ourselves and each other for years. I started the car and drove toward the townhouse that wasn't quite home anymore, toward the week of decision that waited, toward the slow, uncertain work of becoming someone new or rediscovering someone old. I wasn't yet sure which. Wednesday arrived wrapped in gray November clouds, the kind of weather that matched internal landscapes, neither stormy nor clear, just uncertain and waiting. I sat in the coffee shop 40 minutes early, the same corner table where Sarah and I had talked for 4 hours on that first date 12 years ago. The decor had changed, the menu had evolved, but the bones of the place remained the same. Ghost of a beginning haunting what felt like an ending. I'd spent the past 2 days walking, just walking through DC, through Arlington, along the mall and the monuments, past the buildings where I'd briefed presidents and generals and made decisions that affected lives I would never meet, trying to feel something about the work beyond competence, beyond duty, beyond the comfortable identity it provided. Marcus had called Monday evening. Any clarity yet? Some, I'd said. Still processing. That's honest. What's your gut telling you? That I'm terrified of being ordinary. That the work has been armor against insignificance for so long, I don't know who I am without it. And Sarah, the marriage ending, is that freeing or devastating? Both, I'd admitted. It's both simultaneously, which I think means it needed to happen even though it hurts. Sarah arrived exactly at 2, looking smaller somehow, diminished in ways that had nothing to do with physical size. She'd cut her hair, shorter, simpler, less corporate, executive, and more uncertain human. No makeup, jeans instead of power suits, someone trying to figure out who she was without the professional identity that had defined her. Hi, she said, sliding into the chair across from me. Hi. We ordered coffee, same orders we'd had 12 years ago, though I doubted either of us consciously remembered. Some things lodged in muscle memory, in patterns established when we'd been different people with different futures. So, she began, then stopped. Started again. I've been in therapy, 4 sessions so far. Dr. Richardson, she specializes in trauma and career transitions and apparently marriages that implode spectacularly. That's good. Therapy is good. She asked me to describe our marriage. I couldn't. I could describe my career, my projects, my goals, but us, I had no language for it. Just absence, things that should have been there but weren't it. I nodded, recognizing the truth in that. I told Marcus I'd been treating the work like a calling. He said all callings are suspect, that they're usually just fear of ordinariness dressed up as noble purpose. Is that what I was doing? Treating my career like a calling to avoid addressing why our marriage had become a transaction? Maybe we were both doing versions of that. You with your corporate ladder, Me with my clearances and access and importance that existed only in classified spaces. Sarah wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, seeking warmth or comfort or just something physical to anchor to. Dr. Richardson asked if I loved you. Present tense, I said I didn't know anymore. Didn't know if what I felt was love or guilt or just grief for wasted years. What did she say? That maybe it was all three, that love doesn't erase guilt, that grief doesn't cancel affection, that relationships can die even when caring remains. She sounds wise. She costs $200 an hour. She better be wise. A ghost of Sarah's old humor flickered, then faded. What about you? Are you okay? I don't know. I took a week to decide whether to accept a new mission. Something significant, strategically important, exactly the kind of work I've always excelled at. And I looked at her fully, saw genuine curiosity there, maybe even concern. Not performance, not manipulation. Just human interest in what happened to someone she'd once loved, still cared about, even if the marriage couldn't survive. I'm declining it, I said, the decision solidifying as I spoke it aloud. I'm telling Carmichael tomorrow that I need to step back, really step back this time. Not the performance I did 3 years ago where I maintained clearances while pretending to be domestically available. Surprise flickered across her face. Really? Daniel, that's huge. That work is everything to you. It was everything. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe when work becomes everything, you lose perspective in what actually matters versus what just feels important because it's familiar and you're good at it. So what will you do? I have no idea. That's terrifying and also maybe exactly what I need. To not know, to not have a plan or mission or identity that exists independent of my choices. I took a breath. I'm thinking about teaching. Maybe at Georgetown with Marcus, maybe somewhere else. Using what I know to help people understand security architecture without requiring clearances or classifications or the particular kind of moral compromise that operational work demands. That's so different from who you've been. Maybe, or maybe it's who I've always been underneath the officer persona. Someone who wants to make things better, who values understanding over secrecy, who believes teaching might matter more than controlling. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the 12 years pressing down alongside the lightness of possibility. Separate possibilities now, individual futures rather than shared trajectory. I signed the separation papers, Sarah said finally. My lawyer wanted me to fight for more. Spousal support, division of assets, all the standard battlefield positions. But I told her no. Clean separation. You keep what's yours, I keep what's mine. We owned the townhouse jointly. I suggested we sell it, split the proceeds evenly. Agreed, I can't live there anyway. Too many ghosts. Yeah, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'm sorry, Daniel, for all of it, for not seeing you, for taking you for granted, for building my success on your diminishment. You deserve better. We both deserved better than what we gave each other. But we're young enough to learn from it, to do better in whatever comes next, with whoever comes next. Will there be someone next for you? I considered that honestly. Maybe, eventually, when I figure out who I actually am outside the clearances and operations and control personas. Hard to offer partnership when you don't know what you're partnering as. Dr. Richardson said something similar, that I need to learn to exist alone before I try to exist with someone. That codependency and partnership aren't the same thing. She managed a small smile. Apparently, I'm codependent on achievement rather than people. Who knew that was a thing? Achievement addiction, status seeking as psychological compensation. The intelligence community runs on it. So does defense contracting. Maybe that's why we worked initially, matched pathologies, creating illusion of compatibility. That's dark, but probably true. She finished her coffee, gathered her bag, preparing to leave. For what it's worth, I hope teaching works out. I hope you find whatever you're looking for outside the mission parameters and national security. And I hope, she stopped, swallowed. I hope you're happy, Daniel. Actually happy, not just competent and successful and important. You deserve that. You too, Sarah. You're brilliant and capable and going to rebuild something significant. Just maybe do it without sacrificing everyone around you this time. I'll try. She stood, hesitated, then leaned down and kissed my forehead. Gentle, final, a benediction more than romance. Goodbye, Daniel. Goodbye, Sarah. I watched her leave, walking out of the coffee shop into uncertain futures, neither of us knowing exactly what came next, but both finally honest about what had ended and why. My phone buzzed. Marcus. Made your decision yet? Yes. Declining the mission, accepting the teaching position if Georgetown still wants me. Taking the terrifying step into ordinary life. Proud of you. That takes more courage than any operational assignment. Doesn't feel courageous. Feels like surrender. Sometimes surrender is victory. Sometimes choosing yourself is the bravest thing you can do. I typed a response to Carmichael, brief and professional. Respectfully declining Project Sentinel assignment. Separating from operational status, effective immediately. Thank you for 15 years of meaningful work. Time for someone else's turn. His response came quickly. Understood. Door remains open if you change your mind. You'll be missed. Appreciated. But I won't be changing my mind. I paid for the coffee, left the shop that held both beginning and ending, walked into November afternoon with no mission waiting, no crisis requiring my expertise, no identity except the one I would slowly, uncertainly build from whatever remained when the armor finally came off completely. The monuments rose in the distance, marble testaments to people who'd made history, who'd mattered in ways that echoed through generations. Once, I'd wanted to be among them, not publicly, but in the classified histories, the secret records of people who'd protected nations through invisible service. Now I just wanted to be Daniel Whitmore. Teacher maybe, person definitely. Someone who chose connection over clearances, presence over performance, truth over comfortable deception. It wouldn't be easy, wouldn't be prestigious, wouldn't come with briefings or access or the particular identity that made you feel significant even when you couldn't tell anyone why. But it would be mine. Chosen freely, built honestly, existing in daylight rather than classified shadow. And maybe eventually that would be enough. Maybe being human, flawed and uncertain and small in the vast machinery of history, maybe that was actually the point all along. I walked toward the metro, toward home that wasn't home anymore, toward whatever tomorrow held when I stopped being Officer Whitmore and just became me. The rain started again, gentle, cleansing, washing away nothing but somehow making everything feel new anyway. Beginning again, I thought, always beginning again, and this time maybe getting it right, maybe getting it right.